We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. 30 years ago, I stood in front of a comic shop advertising the death of Superman in its window display. That moment outside Heroes World set me on a path, a lifelong fan journey leading directly from that tattered red cape to this podcast. Now, together, we mine Superman's vast 85-year mythology by examining, discovering, and reconsidering the stories that have shaped the last son of Krypton. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the Arrowverse's adaptation of Crisis on Infinite Earths is the host of the Always Hold On to Smallville podcast, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
I'm always around.
You sure are. Red Skies are back, baby, and you're here this time. This time you're not missing out. Last year, we did our epic run of episodes looking at all of DC Comics crisis-level events. You and I had talked a little bit about maybe covering the Arrowverse event then, but you had just covered it on one of your shows, and I was really zeroed in on the comics at that point, and we had a lot of ground to cover, so we put a pin in it. But here we are now, and I feel like this is the perfect time to do it because here we are early in 2024, and we can look at this television adaptation of the seminal comic book storyline. And then at the end of this year, I will do an episode on the animated trilogy that is currently underway. So this year, we'll have a couple of Red Skies events tied into these adaptations. So it should be a lot of fun.
I mean, DC Comics keeps going back to that well, so makes sense that you would as well.
I might as well. Yeah, for sure. But this
I am far more interested now in those animated movies, knowing that allegedly Kevin Conroy did a final voice performance as Batman in it, which not only to me says, oh, Kevin Conroy's final performance as Batman, I'm in, but also, oh, they're actually going to do a Crisis on Infinite Earths with other universes and cartoons and animated shows that we are aware of instead of like just from scratch, which to me is pointless. So we'll see how it plays out. I haven't watched. Part 1 is currently out. Part 2 is coming out soon. I haven't watched any of it, but when they're complete, I'll sit down and watch them all. So that's my plan there.
Same here. It might sound surprising that I haven't watched part 1 yet, but I'm not doing an episode on it yet. So that's why I haven't got to watch it yet.
Our time is very valuable. And we're going to watch superhero stuff, and there has to be a reason.
Very much so. But this was the 5-part crossover event that aired in late 2019 and early 2020 across Arrow, Flash, Batwoman, Supergirl, and DC's Legends of Tomorrow, adapting that 12-issue maxi series by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. And it marked what would be the final major event of the Arrowverse as we knew it, though it might not have necessarily felt that way at the time, but that's what it proved to be. But it was an event that they had been building to for a while, and I've been curious to revisit it. I only ever watched it as it was coming out, and at that point in time, we had just had our son that August, so he was only a few months old, so it was early days of parenthood, so that whole period is a bit of a daze. And I was so swept up in the return of Tom Welling as the Clark Kent of Smallville, which we've talked about on the show before, and you've talked about on your show, and you and I have talked about off mic, and we'll talk about it here, but there was a lot of that going on, and as I've discussed, my initial reaction to that scene wasn't the most positive. My feeling has changed over time, but initially, once we got past that, and then we had the big break in between parts 3 and 4, by the time the thing wrapped up, I wasn't as plugged into it. And I never went back to it. So this was the first time that I sat down over yesterday and today, watched the entire thing, in a relatively concentrated period of time. And I quite enjoyed it. What was your experience with your rewatch?
Yeah, this is probably the third time I've watched it properly, start to finish. I've watched scenes over and over and over and over. We'll talk about some of that, right? Um, so I remember when it first came out, it felt very anticlimactic, especially part 4 and 5 coming out like a month later in the same night. It felt like, let's get this thing over with. I'm like, whoa, what happened here? Like, that's how it felt. And then rewatching it, because on my Patreon, we had a Patreon show called Always Wanted the Flash. So the Flash, the 1990 Flash, because it's one of my favorite shows, which is going to come into our conversation here, no doubt. And I'm like, well, this is a good excuse for us to talk about this. So me and Matt Truix, who's been on your podcast as well, we rewatched it and talked about it, but not like didn't do some like blow by blow thing, and not that we will be doing so here either. But just kind of did it over, kind of fly over it all, and I remember like thinking, I like it. I think I liked it more, but I also like some things stuck out to me. Like, oh, well, that was some missed opportunities, because the hype is gone right by then. And then now rewatching, I was like, okay, I really admire what they did. It's interesting. Like I'm looking for certain things. I'm looking for the seams now. I'm like, I noticed a lot of things, like a lot of characters saying, hey, we're so-and-so. Oh, well, they're off doing that. Because, scheduling and shooting, and then like characters they're in locked off one shots and group shots. So, like, surely Grant Gustin came the next day and shot this. For example, fun stuff to notice when you're rewatching it. Cause now I'm looking for stuff like that this time. But ultimately, like I enjoyed it. I do think it was a monumental thing to undertake, and I applaud them for the attempt. I think they did a lot of great things. I think they dropped a ball on a few things. I think necessarily, does it hold together as a start to finish narrative? I don't know, but like it's so hard for me to judge this thing because of the nostalgia for Smallville, the 1990 Flash, Brandon Routh as Superman, Kevin Conroy in the Flesh, and then of course I loved a lot of the Arrowverse at the time, right? So I don't know. It's crazy that this has been, you're saying 2019. It's it's 4.5 years old at this point, or maybe a little less. But to me, it just feels like this just came out. So I feel like my thoughts haven't really cemented. And if anything, my rewatch taught me, I'm like, I don't know. I got to give this a few more years before I can start talking about like where it truly ranks for me, if that makes sense.
No, I totally hear you. I think overall it's fair to say this was a bit of a mixed bag with some missed opportunities, but with some incredible moments and fan service and payoffs. And the fact that it exists at all is pretty amazing from that production standpoint. And just to see that comic brought to life in this way, and people might differ on this, but having reread the original comic not that long ago, I feel like this did a very strong job of adapting the core beats and ideas and themes of the comic. It's not a direct translation. It couldn't be. But I think that they made it work within the context of the universe that they built. And certainly the mix of characters is different than we had in the comic. It's not a one-to-one, but I feel like they really did a very admirable job of honoring the source material while making it work in the context of this. But to your point about looking for the seams, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like an example, there's a moment where Vibe, Killer Frost, and Flash transport into the basement of Star Labs, and all you see of Flash is that quick streak of lightning as he zips away. And Frost is like, "Oh, where's Barry going?" And Cisco's like, "Oh, he had to do some recon on the perimeter." So yeah, things like that might be a little bit more sensitive to, especially upon rewatch and knowing just how strained the production schedule was, juggling all of these actors and 5 shows. And though Black Lightning, the show, wasn't itself an official part of the crossover, the character of Black Lightning, played by Cress Williams, it was. So they also had that in the mix as well, on top of all of the cameos.
Yeah, and talking about being a good adaptation of Crisis, I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go too. A lot of the things are very similar. Like, it's like, hey, you thought you won, and then, oh wait, here's this extra thing, and it's not over yet. I'm like, oh, that feels like, oh, we got to stretch this out over 5. But no, like that's the story. That's literally how it went in the comic books. And I think you can lose sight of that sometimes. And also, Christ on Infinite Earth, you think, oh my, all these characters and all these people. Like, I mean, if you look at the comic book, like, yeah, you see a lot of Earths and they get destroyed and then you move on. but there's not a lot of like, people from Earth so and so and Earth whatever together, all like Earth to Superman is the big, through line. Like he's at the end and whatnot. So as disappointed as it might have been, because to me, I was like, oh wow, like we're gonna bring everybody in. It's gonna be awesome, right? And then it just turns out, actually, it's all the characters you've been watching on these shows, which makes sense because it is those shows. So it's hard to hold that against them. But I felt a little disappointed. Like, I don't know. I kind of wanted to see Kingdom Come Batman over here by Kevin Conroy next to Brandon Routh Superman. Like, I wanted to see these combinations of characters. Also, because we didn't listen, friends. This is before there was a show called Superman and Lois, and we didn't get to see Superman very often. So any Superman himself in the flesh was just perfect to us, and we're so excited for it. And so to see like, oh, I guess that's it for Superman. Like that's stuff that's disappointing, but you can't hold it against them for making the stars of their shows the heroes. You know what I mean?
I know. I had to make some peace with that, and I think I landed in a similar place because you're watching it and it's like, wow, how convenient that 5 out of the 7 Paragons were all people that we already knew.
I mean, that's why even do that? That's the thing. They draw attention to the fact that, well, there are 7 across time and space. I'm like, great, we're gonna go collect John Wesley Shipp, and we're gonna get Brandon Routh and maybe a Tom Welling, and maybe an Ashley Scott Huntress. I mean, I know that's a deep cut, but she was there, right? So I'm like, I don't know. That's what that to me, that's a main thing I would have changed. Like, make all the Paragons from other universes, and then you don't have to have a lot of screen time, but that makes them special. Like, we're gonna go on a search for the Paragons. Oh, look, like you said, 5 of 7 of them are here in this room right now from Earth One, and it also amused me when they kept when it starts, they rotate like Earth 1, Earth 89, whatever. And then it gets to a point, like probably the second or third episodes, where every time it's like Earth 1, Earth 1. I'm like, okay, everything's on Earth 1. Don't act like it's not.
That's fair. I feel like, though, they didn't help themselves because they revealed the Paragons in 2 stages. There was the initial 4 that we had some clarity on, and then Ray was creating his detector, and then they revealed the remaining 3, and again, it's like 2 out of the 3 are in the room. So I feel like they might not have done themselves any favors there. But yeah, no, that's the thing. And looking at the comic, having all of those heroes from different Earths in the same space, there's something very appealing about that. Here, in fairness, yeah, they have their core actors who they're utilizing, and even just having the actors from those 6 shows on screen together is a big deal. They've had plenty of crossovers, but this was, but even that, it was always a special event, and this was on a whole other scale. So you had those crossover moments and opportunities to see characters together you didn't normally, but yes, you still can't help but feel like there was a bit of a missed opportunity with these other ones. And the one that drove me nuts, though, was the Brandon Routh Superman, because here's an actor who's a main cast member on one of your shows. So you have him,
right,
and you're utilizing him in this capacity as Superman. And when we get to Vanishing Point and he disappears, and we find out that Lex Luthor rewrote the Book of Destiny to make himself the Paragon, I was just like, it broke my heart, because all I wanted was more time with the Brandon Routh Superman. And out of everyone, they could have had him.
He's the guy. Yeah, that's just great. So like, the thing with him is he has some great stuff in here. And then they get to there, and he's like all strolling around. He's like, well, I'm like, oh, he's going to be in charge of these guys now. And I was so hyped. And then he turns into Lex Luthor. I was like, oh no, is that it for Brandon Routh? And, he got his little Christopher Reeve ending, fly off into space at the end. So thank goodness for that. Because unlike Smallville, we know that his Earth still survived. I'm still waiting on confirmation that Earth 167 didn't get erased. This rewatch, speaking of things that that helped you reconsider it, like, I was like, it makes a lot of sense, though, that Lex Luthor would do that. If you're going to have Lex, he would replace Superman. And I really like John Cryer's Lex. And this, like, he is, and this should be obvious to everybody, but this time I was like, oh, he is being the Gene Hackman Lex Luthor, basically, like, and a little post-crisis thrown in there. which makes sense because John Cryer in Superman 4 as Lenny Luthor, like all the connection points are there. But the thing is not just, it goes beyond. I really enjoyed his casting. Because it goes beyond just like, oh yeah, this guy was in Superman 4. It's like, oh, this is an Emmy award winning actor, who, like this guy is legit. And he quickly became one of my favorite Lex Luthors. And I used to say he's like my second favorite one, but I don't think I can say that because he never really faced Superman. And that's a big asterisk on there. We talked about Krypton recently on your podcast. I'm like, man, I love Colin Salmon as General Zod, but can I say he's my favorite if he never fought Superman? I don't think I can. But that's a good problem to have. It's good to have a bunch of great Zods and a bunch of great Luthors. But this time, Anthony, that's where my train of thought went after you said that. I was like, okay, I get it. I get it why Lex replaced Superman, but that was such a loss. It was such a loss because I thought, okay, he can keep the momentum going for the second half because in the Crisis comic book, Earth 2 Superman is around. That's basically who he's playing, the Earth 2 Superman. Just a melting pot of all the Kingdom Come and Christopher Reeve and Brandon Routh Superman. And to your point, he is a cast member. You're paying him already. So, oh man, but why don't we take a step back and think about when we first heard about when this was going to happen, right? You're watching the Arrowverse crossover still at this point.
Yeah, and we get to the end of Elseworlds with our title card. The Crisis on Infinite Earths is coming. I was surprised and very excited. Did you have a similar reaction?
I was like, they're going to do it. I'm like, we better see Tom Welling. And we did, thank God. I was hyped to see Psycho Pirate, who they forgot existed in this for some reason.
Yeah, I know.
Whatever.
Yeah. They referenced Deegan, but yeah, I know. We don't, their version of Psycho Pirate. But yeah, we don't see him.
Yeah, but I was like, they're going to do it, right? And then, of course, you speculate and you have your wish list and all that. And then, they start, and this is where they play themselves, going off those paragons and all that. Like they start announcing like Burt Ward's going to be in. I'm like, wow, Burt Ward. Okay. Ashley Scott's going to be in. I'm like, wow, they remembered Birds of Prey, the TV show. Good on them, right? And so they're sprinkling out, these announcements. And then finally, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the day that I heard Tom Welling was going to be back as Clark Kent. Specifically as Clark Kent. It's very important. Because look, when you heard Brandon Routh was going to be in, I'm like, well, yeah, of course. But when you hear Tom Welling is going to be in, all right, now you have my attention. You have my curiosity, but now you have my attention, right? And then the next day, Erica Durance is going to be in the Crisis in multiple episodes. I'm like, oh, wow. Erica Durance is going to be in multiple episodes. Of course, she's playing Supergirl's mom and like, what a loophole there. And I remember, I'm like, those happened in back-to-back days, Anthony. And I was so in on social media at this point. I was making posts. I was doing podcasts and I was ready. I literally blocked out the time, drafted up a post. I'm like, obviously tomorrow they're going to announce Michael Rosenbaum because of course they would, because Stephen Amell started a wine company with these guys. I'm like, okay, right? Because who had been more plugged into all this? I mean, obviously Erica Durance was appearing occasionally on Supergirl. But Stephen Amell had really been pushing Tom and Michael. It's like, oh, teasing them, right? And then it never comes. It never comes. And there's no Michael Rosenbaum. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, at least there's Tom Welling, because I never would have expected the reverse, right? This is where the paradigm started to shift for me, where I'm like, oh, I guess Tom Welling is more into this than Michael Rosenbaum after all, right?
Absolutely. That's the thing. And when we talk about the passage of time here, like yourself, for me, it feels like this was just yesterday, but it was almost 5 years ago. And even longer when we're talking about these announcements. And in recent years, Tom Welling now has become a regular on the convention circuit, which I never thought I would see. He and Rosenbaum do a Smallville rewatch podcast. Never thought I would see that. So it was a sort of thing where the idea of Tom Welling coming back as Clark, I just didn't know that he had the interest in that. So as much as, and you and I didn't know each other at this point. If we had, I'm sure we would have been speculating and whatnot, but it was one of those things where, of course it's a possibility, but I didn't really entertain it until it became real with that announcement. So the thing that I guess I'll always be grateful for is for that period of time leading up to the episode of Batwoman, hour 2 that he appears in. It was the first time in almost a decade that I had that specific level of excitement that I used to have for Smallville all the time, and heightened because we hadn't seen him in so long, and what's it going to be like? So yeah, it was a very, very exciting time. I wish I could say that my experience watching it for the first time lived up to that excitement.
Mm-hmm.
As I've talked about, my initial viewing was one of disappointment in terms of how they handled the character, but I've come around on that in a big way, and so I definitely had a lot more fun with it this time. But I imagine you had a similar level of excitement heading into that.
Oh man, that was incalculable. I'm like, this is because I'm in I think around season 5. I was just starting season 5 of the podcast at that point. I'm like, this is great. I got the Smallville podcast. I got Smallville people coming back. I was like literally staying up late and recording podcasts and posting the next day. I'm like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity here. I'm not going to let this pass. And those are some great times. It wasn't just. And to me, it wasn't just Tom Welling. It was Kevin Conroy and it was John Wesley Shipp. And I was like, these are heroes of my childhood all coming back and converging the same thing, like crazy times. And yeah, it's to me, it held up. So should we just? I don't know how you want to format this conversation.
I know you've asked me about what I had in mind for the structure of this, and I was like, I don't know that I have that specific of one. I mean, I think very broadly speaking, there are a few ways to look at this. There's certainly the Superman of it all, and the Smallville of it all. And I think for you and I and for our audience, I suspect we'll spend a fair amount of time on that. But then there's also, as we've already hit on, this television event as an adaptation of the comic book series. And then this event within the context of the Arrowverse specifically, and what it paid off, what it maybe was setting up that did or did not come to fruition. And that's actually one of the other reasons why I wanted to go back to this and watch it again and do an episode on it, because I've not really, other than talking about the Tom Welling scene in Crisis, I really haven't done any episodes where we've gotten into the Arrowverse. And I feel like whenever the Arrowverse comes up in conversation, I speak about it in kind of a defeated sort of way, because as the years went on, I really did lose interest in most of the shows. I watched Arrow all the way to the end, but I stopped before the end of Flash, before the end of Legends, even before the end of Supergirl and before the end of Batgirl. And Crisis was really the last hurrah for me in most of those respects. And I don't, it's unfortunate to me that's sort of now colored my view. The fact that it sputtered out, in my opinion, after Crisis, that then sort of colored my view of the Arrowverse as a whole. But I remember at its best, there were some great moments and great seasons and great arcs. And so I kind of wanted to go back to this and just revisit it, because I don't want to just look at the Arrowverse as this failed experiment, because it accomplished something amazing that we hadn't seen before, and I don't know that we'll see again. Certainly not on the CW.
No, not anymore.
So kind of on that note, and I know this is a big question, but just generally speaking, your experience with the Arrowverse. I know you own all the seasons, but have you watched all the shows? Did you similarly lose interest with some or all of them? And if so, where did that happen?
Yes. So I, of course, watched Arrow when it started, and I was like, you're not Justin Hartley. Why are you in Lex Luthor's house and all that kind of attitude? But Arrow quickly won me over, because I think the first 2 seasons of Arrow are really great. And especially the second one. I think the second season of Arrow is like the gold standard for the Arrowverse. And then they introduced the Flash. I'm like, wow, the Flash could it be even better? Like that first season of the Flash is a great season of television. Tom Cavanaugh, just what a guy, what an actor to be playing all these layers of this character, Reverse Flash and is so having the comic knowledge you have, you're like, what are they doing here? And they slowly reveal, like, okay, all right, you guys know what you're doing. I should know. Jeff Johns, close personal friend of Always on the Smallville, Jeff Johns, of course, was involved. So of course, he's not going to drop the ball when it comes to like these Flash origin stories and whatnot. So I'm sure he set him straight if they had any more crazy ideas about Reverse Flash in those early years. But that whole storyline, so I'm like, oh, this is great, and then Supergirl comes to CBS. I'm like, wow, we're going like more mainstream now, and even Constantine. I watched Constantine on NBC. That's a whole nother level to this. That's another thing that feels like a crossover, and I guess it is, but it's kind of not. He's a a relatively large part of this, John Constantine. And so I'm like I'm all in on these shows, but as time goes on, like I start the Smallville podcast, and like that's going to take up a lot of my time, like rewatching the show and recording it, and I got a life I'm trying to live here too, so like there's only so much time in the day, and like the shows started to dip in quality, and I don't know what year this was, maybe like 2016 or 15. I don't know, like season 3 of The Flash, I think is where I started to fall off. And I think that's funny, right? When I ask people a similar question, they always say like around that time. And season 4 of Arrow was terrible, but season 5 was really good. But then I felt like, okay, I feel like we've told our story now. Like, I don't know. I mean, they kept going, but it was always supposed to be a 5-year story. So I'm like, this is a good jumping off point, especially because I'm busy. And I never intended. The thing is, I never like said I am not going to watch these anymore. It was just kind of fizzled out, man. Like Legends, I was trying to keep up. Right, a Black Lightning, I watched the whole first season. I thought that was a fantastic show. Then, it's as Supergirl came over the CW. Like there was just too many. Ultimately, there are too many shows. Like if there were like 2 or 3 shows, I probably would have stayed with them all. But when there's like 6 and occasionally a random other one like a Constantine or something, I'm like, I can't keep up, and I'm trying to watch Smallville now, and there's movies, and, so it's an embarrassment of content, right? And it was too much. And now had they all been to the quality of Arrow season 1, 2, Flash season 1, I would have like made the time to watch it maybe. But I think they just suffered from spreading themselves too thin. You can even see that with, once the Flash starts, Arrow starts to go down, and they come back up, thankfully. But there's only so much creativity to go around, and we talk about Smallville. Well, they had to crank out 22 episodes a year. The Arrowverse is cranking out like 100 episodes a year. So I don't like, I don't envy them if the job presented to them, but that is the combination of too many shows, too much of a quality dip, inconsistent quality, and just living life. And a combination of that, I just fizzled out. Like I know a lot of people that kept watching all the shows, and good and bad, and I just couldn't keep up. So that's where I am.
We had similar experiences, and like yourself, there was never any point where I was like, I'm done, I'm dropping the show. It was this gradual fade out where the episodes were piling up on the DVR, and then it got to the point where, well, they're on Netflix a week after the season ends, let's just watch them then. And then they hit Netflix, and then I still didn't watch them. And I know I echo everything you said. I just think that, the number of episodes and the number of series and seasons, just all of it. It's, I don't know that I don't know. I think had the quality been there, I would have been able to sustain the interest, but it wasn't necessarily. It's funny when you mention Arrow season 2, like yourself, I hold that up as one of my favorite seasons of any of these superhero shows, but it was an important lesson, I think, because I remember watching that, and not that, I want to be clear, it never supplanted Smallville in my mind or in my heart, but there was a feeling at a certain point in Arrow season 2, and it was really firing on all cylinders, where it's like, man, like this is so good. And it's just a character fully realized, and we're pulling in all these characters. And with Smallville, it was always that we were building towards something. Mm-hmm. And there was that brief moment where I was like, man, I wish Smallville had a season like this. But what I recognize when I see the trajectory of the show, all the Arrowverse shows, there's something to be said for Smallville and the long game that it was playing, frustrating though it was at times, but there was this larger picture that we were building toward. And I feel like that's what allowed that show to sustain itself for a full decade and to hold my interest and your interest for as long as it did. Whereas some of these other shows, they gave us a lot of stuff that was really cool to see for a certain amount of time, but I don't know that there was enough there to really keep it going. So I had a similar experience. I mean, I was there for Crisis, and then once Crisis passed, I think I finished that season of Flash, and I finished that season of Supergirl, but by the time the next season was rolling around, I was tapped out.
Well, you're watching for Sam Witwer, Doomsday.
Yes.
That season of Supergirl. No, real quick, I have gone through a similar journey. I'm sure I was telling people, like, listen, y'all, Arrow was better than Smallville ever was. Like, if you asked me, like, in 2013, that's what I would be telling people. I'm like, it's blowing my mind. but there's something to be said for a little restraint, you know, where it's like, oh, hey, we did the whole Reverse Flash story. Now what? I don't know. I guess do it again with a different guy. I've said this on the podcast, on my podcast somewhere before, but I got to meet Teddy Sears at a convention, and just a cool, chill dude. Talked to him for a few minutes, and we're talking about, of course, the Flash. And he's like, yeah, when they pitched me the character, I was like, that sounds like what you guys did in season 1. It's like, this guy gets it. Now, season, I feel like the Flash is a lot like Heroes, where it's like the second season gets pulled down by everything that came afterward. Like, I don't think, like, it's not as great as those first seasons of those shows. But the second season is like this kind of intermediate. Like, there's some good stuff there. It's not quite as perfected as the first season was, but it's good in its own right. But then, just when you have the Flash continues to get, worse and worse, pulls down that second season. But no, there's absolutely something you said for Smallville, because you have that endpoint, right? And with Arrow, like, what they should have done was tease out the island. And he's 5 years and he gets off, but then you're off the island at the end of season 2. You're like, well, what are we doing here? And then, like, the flashbacks, which had been one of the most compelling parts of the show, become just not good, for, season 3, 4. Anyway, but I think, you and I both, having lived through Smallville, we were like, it was so gratifying to actually just see a character be the character and not have to wait, right, forever. And so that was a huge part of these shows. Like, oh, you're telling me I can watch shows where it's the character, and it's not like a Batman's not gone or Superman's not Superman yet. Like, this is the prime of their lives. Like, sign me up.
Yeah. I guess the last thing I'll say for now, at least, about the comparison between Smallville and the Arrowverse shows, there's undeniably a thrill about watching the Arrowverse at its best, the best seasons of all of these shows, and seeing these DC Comics characters on screen in all their glory, fully realized as their superhero identities. There is something really, really cool about that. But the other thing that over time really kind of wore on me was how in virtually every show you had the team, right? All of the heroes were surrounded by their team, and there was nary a character to be found on any of the shows who wasn't part of the team and who knew the identity. And it just felt like it became so much more plot driven. It was always about the big bad of the season. And you knew at a certain point, you knew what the rhythm of the season was going to be. And I think everybody kind of knows what we're talking about. And maybe when we get to the later seasons of Smallville, when it was probably closer to what the Arrowverse would become, maybe we can see some more similarities there. But I feel like for the majority of Smallville, it was character driven. And that's why whenever people complain about the Freak of the Week formula that the show utilized, and I'll quote Tom Welling, who brought this up on a recent episode of their podcast, but we've always recognized this. That was just a device. And yes, some were more compelling than others. Some were really lame. But even the weakest Freak of the Week episode probably had some character moment, some beat between the two characters we're following, whose relationship is developing, that we always go back to, that we hold up. And so, and when I look back on those Smallville episodes, that's the stuff I remember probably more than the Freak of the Week of a particular episode. And I feel like with so many of these Arrowverse shows, I feel like they lost the human element, especially as the seasons went on. I feel like you had it more at the beginning, certainly of Arrow and Flash, but as they went on, and they like all veered into that direction. So there was also this problem that goes hand in hand with what we're saying about too many seasons, too many episodes, too many series, but of sameness, right? And of all kind of following the same patterns. So I know I started this by saying I wanted to remember what was great about the Arrowverse. Like, this is what I didn't like.
That's a great segue into Crisis on Infinite Earths, because I think it's a microcosm of the Arrowverse itself. I think, because it starts out, maybe at the end, Anthony, we can rank the 5 parts. Maybe if you want to do that.
Sure.
Be thinking about that. I know what my rankings are, having watched them, this past weekend. I think it starts out, it's a little bit of a slow burn, but then by the time the second and third episodes, it's really hitting its stride. And then by the end, you're just like watching things happen in front of your eyes. And it's like flashy, and it's like, I know that from the comics. That's kind of cool. But it's not like you're like, okay, Ryan Choi, you're going to punch this shadow demon and you're going to be fine. I know. talk about setups and stuff. We'll talk about that a bit. But like, I think that's the key, right? Because they never reached to. Well, let's just talk about this now. I love the Flash 1990 show. I grew up watching that show. My parents taped it off TV for me, and I got the DVDs in college, and that's why I had a Patreon special show about that to kind of like revisit this part of my childhood. And and John Wesley Shipp, he had been on the Flash, the new Flash. They had wisely incorporated him, and he was perfect as Henry Allen. I feel like he was a missed opportunity when he got out of jail, though. He's like, I gotta go, son. I'm like, what are you doing?
I know.
It's like there's a lost episode there because John Wesley Shipp is a great actor. It's not like he's some weird stunt casting, like, oh well, we don't know what else to do with him. He's a great actor. And there's a missing episode of The Flash where like Henry Allen gets out of jail, but everybody thinks he's still a murderer, and it's real awkward. And then he has to leave. Like, there's just write that episode. And then you can explain why he had to leave, like reacclimating to life after being in jail for 20 years. Anyway, Henry Allen's on the show. They kill him off. Then he's Jay Garrick. I'm like, okay, we all wanted him as Jay Garrick. He's back. He's Jay Garrick. This is great. And then, like, and this is something. So I pulled out my Arrow season 8 Blu-rays and watched this all on a disc for the first time. It's the first time I watched them all together. But there's a lot of bits and pieces that are not in this. Like, I don't know if you recall this, but there were all these teases at the end of other episodes.
Yes.
Before Crisis, of like when the Monitor shows up and resurrects Lex Luthor and he talks to Martian Manhunter. But there was one of the most amazing 3 minutes of my television watching, which I don't know what show was the end of, but it was like you see this wasteland of like Earth 90, right? Comes up and it's like there's a dead Green Arrow costume, and you're like, was that Justin Hartley or is that just the Green Arrow Earth 90? I don't know. We're gonna talk about it forever though. And you see Stargirl costume and all these dead, quote unquote bodies and Hawk people, and you see this guy clawing his way up, and it's John Wesley Shipp in the 1990 costume. I'm like, what is this? This is he just came out of a time machine from 1990. It's incredible. I mean, he looks great. The costume, they recreated the costume from scratch. It looks exactly like it did in 1990. I'm like, this is what I'm here for. And he talks to the Monitor, and then he speeds off, and they play the theme. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can't wait for Crisis. And that was actually Elseworlds, I think, now that I'm got on this little rant. That was before Elseworlds. So that was even before Crisis, because that's because he is the Book of Destiny. I'm getting these crossovers confused. So excuse me. But even before Crisis, that kind of set up this whole thing. Because now, before, the Arrowverse had always been about like, oh, these shows, and here's Supergirl here, and sure, they'll show you John Wesley Shipp in a Speed Force thing, but you're not going to do any. That's stock footage, whatever. And oh, look, it's future Connor Hawke from that Legends episode, right? But this was like, oh, he's going to be a character, right? And he did Elseworlds was cool, but like they didn't do enough with him, and then they brought him back for even more. Anyway, I'm going on and on here, but like, to me, the one that had to talk about adapting the comic book, the Flash will die in Crisis, right? This is the whole thing, like. The Monitor, that's one of those scenes that did happen before Crisis. Excuse me. The other one was Elseworlds. The Monitor tells Flash, hey, you're going to die in Crisis. Like, all these little bits and pieces here. And everybody, it's famous that Barry Allen dies in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. And instead of it making a Grant Gustin, they made it John Wesley Shipp. And that was brilliant, I think. And I got choked up and watched him like, this is the hero of when I was a little kid. He takes Barry's speed. I've watched this scene almost as much as the Smallville scene. It's so amazing. And he goes on the thing like, keep riding the lightning, son. He gives him a wink. And I'm like, he runs backwards and saves the multiverse. And they play the song. You see a flashback to him and Tina McGee. Turns out they got married, which is, I love that. I was a big shipper of those two back in the day. She was the Chloe Sullivan of the Flash 1990, Anthony. I'll have you know. She was the, like, you're not supposed to be here. Anyway. He had, I feel like that was an emotional payoff to a character that was well earned. He had been a hero the whole time, and he had been set up before. And I'm like, that's like in episode 3, I'm like, wow, what wonders await us for episodes 4 and 5? Just a bunch of generic action. So it's a very long way of making my point.
But your point is well taken. And let me say, on the note of John Wesley Shipp as the Flash of Earth 90. So I don't share your love for or your knowledge of that John Wesley Shipp series. However, I'm not totally ignorant of it any longer, because our mutual friend Tyler Patrick, he had me on his show, The Krypton Report, a while back, and we watched that pilot for that Flash series. Now, I've had the DVD set on my shelf for years and never watched it. And that provided the motivation, and I enjoyed it, and it was fascinating. And of course, I had seen Ship on the Grant Gustin series, so getting to see him in his prime in that Flash show was really cool, and definitely gave me greater appreciation when I rewatched this. And I will say, despite Superman being my favorite character and really enjoying a lot of what we get on the Superman front, particularly in the form of Brandon Routh, the Flash of Earth 90 making that sacrifice, taking our Barry's place. It was truly emotionally resonant. I was tearing up as I was watching that.
Yes.
And that's someone who has not even watched that entire series, but it really worked. And look, speaking about this as an adaptation, I did a whole episode on Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I don't want to beat up on it any further, but just real quick, I'll say I have a lot of love and respect and admiration for what it did. It was clearly a story that was made with a lot of care, a lot of attention to detail, and a lot of affection for DC continuity. But as I said in that episode, for me, it was a bit of a slog to get through. It's exceedingly dense. It's a very, very dense story, and it's very plot driven. And there are some key moments, particularly the deaths of Barry Allen Flash and Supergirl. And I feel like, for me, actually, the Supergirl death in the comic, I felt like that packed a punch, because I think that issue gave enough space to her final moments. Whereas the death of Barry in the comic, I don't know that it achieved the level of impact that it really could have, because it felt relatively fleeting amongst everything else that was happening. And for those who love the comic, you might disagree, and that's like, I get it. But watching this, like, this was an instance of, wow, it's the death of the Flash. Of course, they have to put a spin on it because we're not killing off Grant Gustin. But it was a great payoff, because for years this has been hanging over the character and the show and us as viewers. It's like, Flash vanishes in Crisis. So to kind of flip that and bring in this character who, fans like yourself had that affection for that particular show, but even if you didn't, he had been a presence in the Arrowverse. So there's that connection point there. And you're with him in those final moments. And I agree, that flashback, the footage from the Flash show, it's a small moment, but it goes a long way. And that was an instance where I feel like this really took a moment from the comics and really elevated it and achieved the level of emotion that I felt the comic just wasn't quite able to get to. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. Like, he was the best used in the, as I was a little disappointed with him in Elseworlds, because like how little he was in it. Because they started with him. They start with, like, I already talked about, like, a whole teaser of him, And I'm like, oh, he just got whisked away. But to have him play that role of the Barry Allen, and in this, it's I mean, I know that Grant Gustin is Barry Allen, but it's almost like he's the Kid Flash that was going to continue the mantle, and and then I was thinking, why is he so upset? Like, he just met this guy a couple times, but he looks just like his dad.
Yeah,
and that's the key. And the thing was Black Lightning. Like, oh, Black Lightning. Like, this is a new show that I love. I got John Wesley Shipp saying, "You're a real hero, Jefferson." I'm like, oh my, this is great. What a crossover. What and then the whole scene afterward where Black Lightning and Grant Gustin Flash talk and kind of process what just happened and talk about their dads and I'm like, this is this is how you bring universes together. This is some great stuff here, right?
That's the thing. And I feel, and I'm kind of scanning through all of these cameos, but I feel like that's the one that stands out, where you are bridging these Arrowverse shows with the wider world of DC television and even film, which we'll get to, but which was probably the most surprising moment of this whole thing when Ezra Miller popped up. But anyway, so I mean, that's one of the cool things about this, was that as you've said, it was not just the Arrowverse shows. Now we're connecting them to all of these past and present adaptations. But in most of the instances, as cool as it was to see a lot of these folks pop up, in many instances, it's just for a few moments to watch their world be destroyed. Now, that is an important part of the Crisis story, and I think that serves a vital function here. But to do something like what they did with John Wesley Shipp, I feel like that's just the sweet spot of, he doesn't have a ton of screen time, but it really packs a punch, and it goes beyond just, seeing him for a minute while his world was being destroyed. Like, he really has a vital function to play in this. I don't mean to nitpick, but there was one thing that I was thinking about as I was rewatching that scene. So they're able to get him off the treadmill, right? The Anti-Monitor is forced him to run, and he's powering this antimatter cannon that's generating the wave. And they're able to get him off, and he's like, I appreciate the reprieve, but I got to go back on, because if I don't, Anti-Monitor has a failsafe where everything will be destroyed all at once. And I'm saying to myself, but that's the goal. That's just like a more efficient way of achieving what you wanted to do all along. So I don't know. It's like, if you're the Anti-Monitor and you have the means to just wipe out everything all at once, what like, what is the purpose of sort of slowing it down? Or maybe he's amassing more power as the wave slowly goes universe by universe. It was just one of those things where he's like, if I don't run, like, everything will be destroyed. I'm like, well, if you're the Anti-Monitor, that sounds pretty good.
Fair enough. I mean, there are much worse plot holes later in the other episodes, but I hadn't thought about that, because I was so preoccupied with, like, or so caught up in the moment of, like, they did the antimatter cannon from the comics, and they adapted it, and this is how you adapt stuff, right? But no, that's a valid point. And then by that point, Earth 1 was the only one left, right?
Yeah, I think we were just about at that point. The
waves coming in, and then Flash Johnny saves the universe, and it's great. And then 10 minutes later, it's like, oh, never mind. Which
yes. Yeah, I know. Lila shows up on the Wave Rider and is under the thrall of the Anti-Monitor. And
Lila, man, talk about the long game. Like, this actress, good on her. She played Diggle's ex-girlfriend in the government in Arrow season 1, and now it's like, you're the Harbinger. Like, what a long game that was. For sure. In looking at this as an adaptation, and you brought this up earlier, for people who aren't familiar with the comics, I do feel like this is true this is true to the comic in an important respect, where there are various starts and stops in the comic. It's 12 issues. It's not just like, oh man, we hit the ground running and it just never lets up. There are numerous points where a select number of worlds are saved, but they're sort of, for lack of a better term, like melding with each other. And so you have all of these characters from different worlds and times popping in and out. Then they're able to achieve, some level of stasis. There's another point later on, which the Arrowverse did not get into, which maybe they should have, but I don't think they would have had the budget for this. But later on in Crisis, where the villains of the DC universe unite and take the opportunity to try to mount an assault and take over. So there's that whole chapter of the story. So I feel like in terms of the rhythm of these 5 episodes, for the most part, I liked it, except for one specific episode, but because we really do hit the ground running. That Supergirl episode that kicks everything off, that shows the beginning of this antimatter wave and Supergirl's Earth and universe destroyed, and getting as many billions of people as they can onto these spaceships and transporting them to the Earth 1 universe. It really doesn't let up. It's very intense, very action-packed. And then as we segue into part 2, we have the search for the Paragons. So things slow down a little bit, but there's the intrigue of where are we going? Who are we going to see? That gives us the Brandon Routh Superman. It gives us the Tom Welling Clark. So the Kevin Conroy Batman. So a little slower, but there's a lot going on and very intriguing. And then we get to, in part 3, what I would say is the high point of this, and the John Wesley Shipp sacrifice
and the loss of the remaining Earth and the retreat of our surviving cast members to the vanishing point. And then part 4, that's where I feel like this kind of, I don't want to say falls apart, but that's where I feel like this stumbles the most. How did you feel in terms of the flow of this?
100%. And even in the way it was plotted out. Now, had this been, I don't know, I assume they shot this all together. Like, I don't think there was a break after 3 and then they shot 4 and 5. I do not know. But in our world, there was several weeks, right? It was the end of 2019, and then a few weeks later they come back with part 4 and 5. Had this been a whole week, because I think that was, we were all thinking, oh man, it's gonna be Christ on Infinite Earths week on the CW, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's gonna be awesome, because the other crossovers had been 3 nights in a row, 4 nights in a row. But you go on this break and you're like, wow. Like, I don't. Maybe we built it up in our heads. Maybe, I don't know. But the momentum and the excitement had worn off by that point, because we had seen Tom Welling, we had seen Kevin Carney, all these people they had promised us. We had seen. I'm like, wow, what's left? And unfortunately, there wasn't much left. That was the problem. And help me understand. This is like I said, this is probably a third time I've watched this episode. What is going on in part 4? I don't like. So like they all. And by the way, Grant Gustin to me is the MVP of this, like acting wise. Like
yes.
That guy, he is just carrying this thing. Though it was more Oliver Queen's thing, but
yeah, no, side note, my wife and I are going to see him on Broadway in Water for Elephants very shortly. So very excited. Yeah, he always brings it. And I'm with you on that totally, but please go ahead.
Oh no, because I'm just thinking like when they're in the vanishing point, he shows up like, oh, where was I? And like he's so like, I don't know, he is bringing something. Like he goes through the gauntlet of emotions of this whole crossover. But like he can't access the Speed Force. Then Oliver Queen Spectre shows up and like we're all going in the Speed Force, and then they all allegedly get attacked by the Anti-Monitor, and they get spread across the Speed Force into other memories, and then we go letterbox. Because it's different now. I'm like, oh, okay. And at the time, I was like, oh, I know why this is Letterboxd, because going to use this scene in the Flash movie because Ezra Miller and Grant Gustin are going to meet when he's running through the multiverse. Cool, great. Can't wait for that in a couple years. But
listen, I forever maintain that Andy Muschietti, director of the Flash movie, has never seen a single CW show and might not even really know what it is. That's my working theory. But
Shelley doesn't know who Grant Gustin is. I'll tell you that. But so they're wasting this time. Like they go back into other scenes and they've reshot some parts of it and they haven't. And I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, it's just a waste of time. Then they go back to like the Marnovu, the Monitor. Like, okay, that part was intriguing to me. And they go back to his thing when he wants to. In the comic, you can't see the beginning of time. They kind of tie that in here. I'm like, okay, that stuff is interesting. But like, I don't know, like a good 30% of this episode is like, I don't understand why they did this weird side quest of like all the characters in different scenes together. And I thought, okay, I'm going to watch it now. Like, I'm watch these all together. Maybe it'll all make more sense. I still don't understand what was going on or why they chose to spend almost a whole episode on that, Anthony. I
wish I had an answer, but I was going to ask you because I was watching it. I'm like, what? Like, what is going on here? It was a baffling choice for an installment of this that picks up as many weeks later as it did in the real world, where you'd had this long break. I think.
And they'd been the vanishing point for months, by the way, in universe.
Yes, that's right.
Because Ryan Choi had his little beard and no one else had any kind of, like, he was the only guy who time passed for, apparently.
But yeah, so at the end of chapter 3, we have our Paragons transported to the vanishing point. Pariah is able to achieve that before Earth 1 is completely annihilated. And then when they arrive, like we said, we have Lex replacing the Brandon Routh Superman, which I do agree with you. I feel like you need that. You need that source of tension, but I just wish he could have replaced someone else, even though I agree with you. It makes the most sense that he would replace Superman.
I thought the same thing. I was like, would he replace Supergirl? I don't know. He would replace Superman. Like, that's what he would do. So,
exactly.
Man, I just miss Brandon Routh.
But so then in that chapter 4, yes, there's this idea Oliver as a Spectre which we'll circle back to, shows up, and there's this plan to use the Speed Force to transport Supergirl and Ryan and Lex to Maltus in the past so that they can try to prevent Marnovu from going back to the dawn of time, which unleashed the antimatter universe and gave birth to the Anti-Monitor. Now, on a positive note, this, I think, was an instance of taking the comic and actually making it more compelling, because in the comic, you get this backstory about Krona on Oa, who was trying to discover the origins of the universe, and he inadvertently creates the multiverse and all of that. I think making it the Monitor tracks a lot better and actually
much cleaner,
puts a little bit more meat on the bone for this character here. So I'm glad they went the route that they did. So that I thought was a nice touch. So you have that trio landing on this alien planet in the past, and then the remaining ones, right, are attacked by the Anti-Monitor, end up in the Speed Force. I think that, and this was the episode of Arrow that was in this crossover. And I think that the intention was to sort of give you a tour through key moments in Oliver's journey that pointed towards this larger world that he helped facilitate and these bonds that he forged. I think that was the intention, but I don't think I don't think that really came across. And I think they could have achieved that. And I think they could have done more of a kind of like a quieter interlude in this larger story. And it could have worked, but I don't think that it did, because you see these moments that are recreated, but nothing really seems to, I don't know, be like, that quite compelling.
Why is Kate Kane watching Ray Palmer confront Oliver Queen about being the Green Arrow? I'm like, what?
Right. She's looking at it and she's like stunned, and it's like, what does this mean to you? This doesn't mean nothing. So,
and then the memories are self-aware. So it's like, oh, look, we got Katie Cassidy in here for this scene where she sees Sarah dead. I'm like, what? Like, this is the Christ on Earth. Can we have like Katie Cassidy in some other role?
Right. So I feel like they were largely, honestly, buying time until they got to that battle,
that's how I felt.
That battle at the dawn of time. But they could have done something more interesting. And I don't know why they landed exactly where they did, but it was kind of nebulous as far as what exactly the objective is. I do think that's what they were trying to achieve, that tour through Oliver's journey. But I don't know, it just didn't work. And that's why I say, I don't think they had the bandwidth or the budget for this, but this could have been a point. You would have had to switch the order of some things, so you couldn't have had all the Earths destroyed, right? But if they had the villain assault or something like that in this part of the story, or something like that, if they had switched 4 and 3, I don't know. But that was one piece from the comics that I was like, oh, that would have been, if they could have done something like that on the show, to have the villains team up or something like that. But I don't know. That was the one that felt like really just kind of things grinded to a halt. Now, you and I, we've made our position on the Flash movie clear, but that was what, going back to watching this the first time, that was probably the most surprising part of this, was Ezra Miller popping up. Because there was a lot that was announced, there was a lot that was speculated on, and seeing other TV actors showing up here, totally, that made sense. But the idea that they would bring in Ezra Miller from the DC EU, I just didn't think it was within the realm of possibility. So I was genuinely surprised the first time around.
Yeah, I would have been, but a friend texted us during
we
were watching that. So Lance and I were watching this together, and I think we had recorded it, and we're like, oh, we'll watch it a little later. And they're like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, what the hell?
That was, we have never let him hear the end of it.
Good. Rightfully so.
Because you're right, but that's how they should have done all the cameos. Don't announce Burt Ward when he's going to be walking. Actually, that was a cute cameo. He's big into his German Shepherds. That's why he has a dog there walking. He's wearing the Robin costume. They have like a 1960s looking world he's in. I appreciated that. And so that's fine. Don't announce Ashley Scott, right? Just have her in there. Dina Meyer was a voiceover, as Oracle. That was nice, cool cameo, a voice cameo. But when you announce all these people months before, you're like, oh, well, they're going to be a huge part of it, right? But then you don't announce Ezra Miller, and he pops up in there. You're like, oh, okay, cool. That's a, like you said, a very unexpected connection. And I truly did believe that we would see that scene from the other side of things. But he just mentioned Victor, so we can't have that. Yes.
Maybe that's what threw a wrench in the works.
And he's got the suit. I'll tell you this: the Flash movie suit gives me all new appreciation for the Zack Snyder Justice League Flash suit, which I was never the biggest fan of, honestly, but I'll take it all day, every day over what we got in the Flash movie. But and also right next, look at Grant Gustin's suit. This is the perfect, well, until he gets the gold boots. Like this is the last 3 seasons or so. They finally cracked it. Like that's my favorite suit. I'm biased, but the John Wesley Shipp costume, that's my favorite Flash suit. I know he's not supposed to be a big muscle guy, but hey, it came out after Batman 89. So give him a break. And then the end of the show, Grant Gustin costume was so good. And like, you know, they kind of touch each other's suits and like, oh, that's cool. And no, but yours just looks safe. And like, it's a cute interaction. Obviously it was last minute thing because they say nothing affects anything, but it is really cool to see. And that's the kind of stuff you want to see in these big crossover things, right?
Yeah. And the Grant Gustin Flash asks a very valid question though, of how is it even possible that you're here? Because at this point in time, everything has been wiped out of existence other than Vanishing Point and the Speed Force, but we'll go with it.
Guess he's in the Speed Force.
He's just, you know, that's
yeah. Speed Force. You don't have to explain anything. You just say the Speed Force.
But to your point, where you say, you know, it's probably a last minute thing. I think that was the case with a lot of this. And going back to what you were saying earlier about how a Rosenbaum cameo didn't come to be, he would go on to tweet about this. Right? Where he talked about how there was an offer.
There's no script.
Exactly. So no money, no script. So he passed on it. But I think this was designed with boxes or slots to be filled in, and it could have gone any which way. And maybe due to just the budget, to scheduling, to not being sure about availability, I feel like that's probably a big part of the reason why you didn't see more built around these people, even though, like we're saying, it would be really cool to have more of them come together and play a larger role, to have some of them be paragons or whatnot. But I think just the way this thing was structured and just the production limitations, I think that's why. And as you watch this, you see how easily you could have swapped in so-and-so for one of the ones that we had, and it really wouldn't have made a difference. You wouldn't have even necessarily noticed. So,
well, that's one thing. I think there should have been one paragon. Should have been more than one paragon per Earth, right? Like I think Kara, Supergirl, great. She's Earth's 38th paragon. Check. Brendan Routh, Earth 96. Check. If Kevin Conroy is not evil Batman, and he's, you know, which I'm of two minds about that. We'll talk about Batman in a little bit, I guess. But like, check. Like, you know, like it just you don't have 70% of them be from Earth 1. It makes it just across time and space, right? I thought, by the way, I'll say it now since we're talking about it, when he's giving that, the monitor's giving that speech, and Clark and Lois's baby keeps crying, interrupting him, I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, that was great. And of course, that Mick would be the one, to calm the child. I had totally forgotten that Wentworth Miller did the voice of the Wave Rider.
That's great. It's a great way to incorporate him.
Yeah. That was terrific.
Always nice to meet a fan.
Yeah, that was great. Like I had forgotten that. And I also, because so many of those cameos of Earths being destroyed happen in part 1, that when we get to, I think it is the start of part 3. Is that when we get the Huntress cameo? But I had forgotten. Like I just had I lost track of her.
There were other Earths at all.
And she showed up and I was like, yes. So I don't think my fandom of the Birds of Prey show reaches the level of our mutual friend, Matt Truex, but I was there for Birds of Prey, man. I watched all 13 and was I a fan? I guess I was. I'll always remember that tattoo song, all the things she said during the climactic battle in what would be the series finale. So yeah, I have fond memories of that show. So that was a cool appearance.
We have, you know, my Always One of the Flash podcast came out of our Always One of the Birds of Prey podcast. We also did my Patreon. That was like kind of a passion project for Matt, and then the Flash is a passion project for me. So him and I were both very pleased with the Crisis and those things. Just like the recognition that they existed. You know, I'm like that was a flash in the pan, drop in the bucket, like 13 episodes. Like that was good. That was supposed to come up with Smallville. I'm sure one day they would have crossed over if it was still on, but it just got cut short and nobody remembers that show. There's like, I was talking about this the other day about something else, but like, I wish there was like one of these Pluto TV channels. They show like free, whatever, like, all the, like themed channels. I wish there was a channel for WB shows that were canceled in the 2000s. I would watch that. I want to watch Jack and Bobby.
Yo, I mean, it kills me that show is not on DVD or streaming.
I've searched the multiverse myself for it, and I can't find. During the pandemic, we were watching it, and I found it on one of these websites where you can just like randomly, like illegally watch stuff, I guess. But then all the episodes aren't there, and I had to stop at some point. I'm like, there's just too many missing. But what a creative concept that show was, and yeah, give me that, give me Tarzan, give me all those shows on some streaming service, and put all of them on Max, and I'll give you a lifetime subscription. So.
I will co-sign that. And when we get, so I agree. I think part 4 of this is where a lot of it kind of breaks down, but we do get that, of course, the powerful finish with Oliver's sacrifice. And as much as we've been talking about the Arrowverse, and we haven't talked a ton about Oliver, but I just want to say the part 5 of this also feels true to the comic, because that's very much how Crisis ended, where you have them all waking up on this new consolidated combined Earth and trying to sort out what's going on, and then having that final battle. So that felt appropriate. It really was that 4th part. And looking at just sort of the overall flow and rhythm of this, that part 4 was the one where I just wish we had maybe gotten a kind of another crack at that one, but it's all right.
I agree. I will say, like, you kill off Oliver Queen Green Arrow in the first part, like, wow, stakes, right? And then you spend the next 2 episodes trying to resurrect him. Then he does come back, and then he dies again. I'm like, oh, okay. So to me, that felt a little repetitive. Like, yep. I know they had to turn him into the Spectre, and like, he's got a green hood. I guess that kind of makes sense if we're going to combine characters like this.
All right. Here's the thing about Oliver as the Spectre. I feel like my initial reaction when I was watching this was kind of like, what? But I've softened on that because, you know, in the comics, famously, Hal Jordan has a tenure as the Spectre after he has his villainous turn as Parallax, but before it's revealed that Parallax was this fear entity that had manipulated him. So this was part of his redemption journey. And between recently revisiting that Hal story and then looking at this, I kind of like the idea of the Spectre being someone we know as opposed to Jim Corrigan, cop. And again, I don't have much skin in the game when it comes to the Spectre, so maybe some diehard Spectre fans will feel otherwise, and that's fine. But I don't know. I've come around more to the idea of it being someone who has a personal connection to the DC characters, because I think during that period of time in DC Comics when Hal was a Spectre, that was the aspect of it that I think was particularly interesting, when he would show up and interact with Kyle Rayner or with the rest of the JLA or Ollie. And
that was like in Identity Crisis. He was a Spectre, right?
Exactly. One of my favorite moments where Ollie's like, when are you coming back? And I was like, I don't know. Yeah, working on it. So I do like that. I've really kind of gravitated more to this idea, and Spectre does play a key role in Crisis. So the idea of using Spectre, but making it Oliver, it tracks to me, but I am with you. He dies too many times in this, and and to the point where when you get to that final death at the end of part 4, and kudo, Grant Gustin and Katie Lotz, I mean, they brought, and Stephen Amell as well. It's an emotional scene, but it just didn't mean as much, because how many times are we going to watch this guy die?
Exactly. Like you talk about stakes and like characters dying and stuff. Like, it's like just immediately resurrecting him. Basically, it's like, can we just give it a little time, please? And come on, you have failed this universe. That is dumb. It's dumb. I don't like it. I've rolled my eyes. I mean, I get. It's just. Am I wrong here? Am I off base?
I know. I feel like it was inevitable, but I agree. It's a bit cringeworthy.
Well, I'll say this: like, for whatever Oliver Queen criticisms I have and Arrow stuff I have for the Crisis, I did come back and watch season 8 of Arrow as this was going on, because I thought because it was kind of a culmination of all this, and I love the Arrow series finale, and I think they did everybody justice, because Mia just disappears, by the way. He's gone. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, at the very beginning, I was like, this hold together narratively? I don't know. Because so many characters, like, you're like the Monitor, gone. Just, okay, I guess his past worked out. Oh, no, in the multiverse, one of them did it anyway. I'm like, oh, okay. Ryan Choi, what? Okay, gone, good. I don't care about you. Why are you here? These are things that stick out of like, oh, you were trying to do something here, and it did not, like Green Arrow and the Canaries. I thought they were going to have that show. He's like, Mia, I think you're going to have your own stories. I'm like, didn't age too well, did it? So it just, that stuff sticks out because we know what they were like trying to tease. That's my thing, right? I just felt like, and I think Mia had a role here, obviously, 'cause she's in Arrow season 8 and all that. But guys like Ryan Choi, I'm like, y'all, you have way too many characters to be introducing more characters that we don't need. No offense to Ryan Choi. I'm just saying, like, we already have the Atom, like Brandon Routh is Ray Palmer. Like, we have other universes to deal with. We don't need to be setting up other things. And that's the microcosm of the Arrowverse as well. The shows start to suffer when they set up everything else. Like Arrow season 4 sets up so much of these other shows, and it's like the worst season of Arrow. So it's like it compromises what it's doing to take time to set up other things. And I think that Ryan Choi is a number one. The first thing I think of, and I'm thinking, why are you wasting so much time? I don't care about this guy and his family. Sorry, but
yeah, no, I know it's a bit much, especially that late in the game. That's the other thing. I think that late in the game, had he been in part 1 or something like that, but
and he's a Paragon. Come on.
Yeah, I know it is a bit much.
I would be more forgiving of him if he wasn't like kicking and punching shadow demons and they're disappearing. I'm like, what are the rules here of these minions? Are they're Power Ranger putties, basically.
Yeah.
That's all they are. And like, I'm not, these guys killed Oliver Queen, but this guy can just hold his own. I don't buy it.
Well, Zach, they were all working together, and Oliver was the last one there. He was alone. He didn't have Dig to watch his back. So
that's right.
I guess that was, as a side note, you referenced the failed backdoor pilot for Green Arrow and the Canaries. It irks me to this day that it's the only episode that Stephen Amell doesn't appear in all of Arrow. And I just feel like you could have thrown in anything, just like a quick little. It'd be like if there were an episode of Smallville that Tom Welling weren't in. It's like, I don't know. It bothers
Interesting
me.
oddity. That's my running joke with my friends is like, what happened to William?
Yeah.
We're never going to know.
We'll never know.
Never know. I don't fault him for that. Honestly, my number one frustration, probably my only frustration about the concept of Green Arrow and the Canaries is because they were going to do that show. They did not resurrect Earth One Laurel. And they kind of like hand wave it in the Arrow series finale when Captain Lance is like, well, maybe you guys are the same. It's like, no, when you're going to reset the universe, you need to reset. You saved Tommy, but you didn't save Laurel. Come on. Like, and the only reason, this is not conjecture, that the creators have said this. Like, oh, well, we would have resurrected her, but we had to do that spinoff show. Well, you didn't do that spinoff show. So now we're never going to find William, and Earth One Laurel's dead forever. But anyway, all that to say.
Yeah.
Arrow series finale is great. So.
It is. No, I'm a fan. I will say, though, speaking of Oliver's final sacrifice here, the one that sticks, my reading of his death after the battle with Anti-Monitor was that he was done. He was done. And then we get the Arrow series finale, and he has his afterlife reunion with Felicity. But then we get to the final season of Flash, and the only episode that I watched of that final season is the one where Stephen Amell returns. And I was like, did I miss something, or did I misunderstand something? Because in that episode, he is serving this Spectre function. And I don't know. I did not think after Crisis he was still in play.
I'm just going to say you're not thinking fourth dimensionally. That's what I'm somewhere in the time stream, he has to, I don't know. Like, yeah, I think we saw his final Eternity Happily Ever After. He got the original Crisis on Infinite Earths Earth 2 Superman ending with Lois, with Felicity, and, in their paradise there. But in between those years, because Felicity's older then, right? I mean, it's like this is before then, like in the flat. I'm glad he came back. He got a goodbye with Diggle and a goodbye with Barry. Like, that could have been your universe ender of him just saying, you're a good man, Barry. You save people in a flash, and he disappears. I'm like, all right, it's good stuff. No, I agree with you. I thought he was like gone. Because that's the thing. They're all mourning him. They have a funeral, and in the series finale, even here, they're all crying, I'm like, he's not really dead. So what do we... That's a sticking point to me. Like the lack of stakes of his death throughout this whole thing. I agree. So
one thing that I've thought about, and I'm sure you have as well, I'm curious for people who don't know the comics or other tellings of these stories. If you really just came up with Smallville and or the Arrowverse, your view of Oliver Queen's importance is probably much different than general fans.
You think it's Superman, Batman, and Green Arrow. You think it's the Trinity, all right?
Yeah, it's like you would think that Oliver Queen is a key component of Superman's origin story. Looking at Smallville, and then and it's called the Arrowverse, and so that's why this is one of the things. Watching the Crisis television adaptation, obviously Oliver's role, the loss of Oliver, the ultimate sacrifice he makes, so much of it revolves around him, what he does, and just the idea and the memory of him. And for me, of course, yeah, I would prefer a more super-centric telling of this story, but it's the Arrowverse. And in terms of what they set up in this context, I can't fault them for it. But yeah, I do wonder sometimes what other people's view is. If this is really their primary exposure to these characters, I would have to view it very differently.
No, I agree. But I do think, talking about slowing down and having human moments, I think one of the best scenes is when Barry and Sarah are sitting in the park. She's talking about that tree, and Oliver's the last guy who knew me, who when I was just me. I was like, that's some good stuff, because yeah, it all started with the two of them on that boat, And I like how her and Barry were there at the end to say goodbye to him. That was very appropriate, So they did key into those things with him and making his start, because I mean, let's be real, like Stephen Amell wanted to leave. So like, well, I guess we'll wrap this whole thing up. We'll move. It's appropriate we're recording this in 2024, Anthony, because this is when the Crisis was supposed to happen.
Right. Yeah.
So the Crisis on Infinite Earths, a Flash story, a Superman story, it becomes a Green Arrow story to a point. I do like, he had to become something else, the Spectre. See, well, I like that. That works. You have failed this universe, not so much, but you had to become something else. That works. So yeah, see, it's like Smallville with the Superman references. Like I don't know what the rules are, but some of them I like, some of them I don't.
Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Hop in the Supermobile and join us for the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, available exclusively for members of my Patreon community. It's a monthly tour across the DC universe with the signature Digging for Kryptonite style applied to your other DC favorites. Additional Patreon rewards include advanced listens, sponsorships, and more. We offer regular monthly memberships, discounted annual plans, free trials, and a la carte purchases. Visit patreon.com/Anthony Desiato or click the link in the show notes for more. Thank you all. All right, speaking of Smallville, we made the people wait long enough.
Let's do it.
I know we've each talked about this already, but I guess what is your take on where we find the Clark Kent of Smallville? And has your view changed since you first watched it?
So I remember when the first images came out of Tom Welling, and he's wearing the gloves, and some were like, well, he gave up his powers. I was like, he didn't give up his powers. And then I had to go find pictures of him as Clark wearing gloves on Smallville, because I know promo pictures of Smallville way too well. So I'm like, here they are. He wore gloves and he had powers, right? So I didn't know. I'm been on record saying, like, if he doesn't wear the costume, there's a big waste. Don't even come back. But you know what? They found a way. They found a sweet spot for me, because these two scenes, scene cut in half by a commercial break, felt like the Smallville I know, and that felt like the Clark I know. And the more we've come to see Tom Welling and his attitude towards everything, the more I love it even more, because he is this character. He's like, certainly haven't missed these chats.
I know.
He just doesn't care about being Superman. I love it. He lives on a farm. He's got a wife and kids. Like it's all like that's his goal in life. So it's very meta. He's kind of become the character, and I don't mind because this isn't Elseworlds. This is look. There's how many other Supermen are out there doing their thing. So like we did not ruin the Superman story by doing this. Now, key to me was talk about people who don't know anything about comics. Like I'm like I know the whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. This is that ending for him, so that it's okay to me. But that's just me, right? Because they presented it so well, like with Lex showing up and the back and forth. It's like not the Lex you know. I was like, okay, you sold me, good. Like I was so like you're not Lex. Like we think that, but then it works so well. And if you do the timeline, how many times have I had to talk to people about this? But like if you do the timeline, he becomes Superman in 2011. Okay, Lex Luthor gets elected president in 2018 for some reason, because on Earth 167, the election cycle is a little off. He has some ultimate battle and he defeats Lex. His ultimate opponent, as Dr. Fate told him in Absolute Justice. And he's like, well, I'm gonna give up my powers. I'm gonna retire to the farm, have a couple girls. And it's, so he was Superman for about 9 years or so. And then he retired. I'm like, you know what? That's fine. Because in live action, how long are any of these characters, these heroes? Now, I always joke about Christian Bale was Batman for like a year and a half.
Right.
John Wesley Shipp was the Flash for like 30 years, though. So fair play to you, sir. Brandon Routh was flying around being Superman for a while. He is some version of that. We'll talk about that. But I don't mind this. This is the Clark I knew from Smallville. It is. And I felt like had we seen him at his desk with his glasses at the Daily Planet, I would have been like, I mean, I guess that's where he's supposed to be, but that doesn't really feel like the show I watch. So it's not. It's more about the show than it is about the Superman story at this point, and that is what he was wearing his flannel on his farm. Now, Lois had some weird dialogue. You made a funny. I'm like, what is that? Like that's like my only criticism of this scene. Frankly, I'm like, what do you? Who wrote that? Carolyn Dries, apparently Batwoman, who just wrote this. A writer on Smallville has a great grasp of the characters. You can see it between the Clark and her. But I'm like, did you not write Lois episodes? Because she doesn't talk that way. That literally is my one criticism. So that's how I feel about it. I don't feel like it's a betrayal of the character. I feel like, he did his time as Superman. And as we all know, if he ever needs his powers back, he can always get them back. But let's be real. Tom Welling has said himself he wasn't going to come back in a Superman costume. So this is the way you get him. And they found the way to do it. And I still love it. And to me, it's a much better, satisfying button on the Smallville story than that series finale, Anthony. Hot take?
Ooh. I'll have to ponder that. But overall,
I think about that.
Overall, I appreciate your insight into the scene. And I wish I had been as receptive to it from the outset. I would have had more fun with this because I did a whole episode called how the Arrowverse failed the Clark Kent of Smallville. I was really...
That was one of my first episodes I listened to. I'm like, what's this guy all about?
And I won't rehash that whole episode, but I just felt that by the time we got to the end of Smallville, he had reconciled the two parts of himself, and he was no longer the character we had followed for so long who just longed for that normal life on the farm. He had gotten past that. And so to see him back in that mode felt off to me. But
like a regression almost, huh?
Yeah, it felt like it undermined the journey and the conclusion to the journey that he had reached. But I think what really sort of turned this for me was when I did my episode on Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which has long been one of my all-time favorite Superman stories. And even as I was watching this for the first time, I certainly recognized, they're pulling from this Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, where he lives a normal human life and has a family. And I guess what I realized in the course of revisiting that story and talking about it is we've seen various endings for the character of Superman, and we can ponder various endings. And in the realm of possibilities where he outlives Lois just through natural causes, or Lois dies, or in the DC 1 million version of the story from Grant Morrison, where he spends, countless years searching the stars and then setting up shop in the sun and then ultimately being reunited with Lois. But after so many years, none of that really felt quite right to me or what I would want for this character I love so much. I think ultimately where my heart is that Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow ending, where he gets to live that life and live as a human. And so that really helped me make my peace with it. And to your point, I think the intention with the scene was to show us a presentation of Clark and Smallville that was in keeping with the series as a whole, not with the series finale, which that's what I kept bumping up against. But I think this really captured the feel. He's on the farm, like you said, the flannel and the can't say I've missed those chats. Great moment when he catches Lex's punch and clocks Lex, goes, still stronger. Like,
still stronger.
Great. Like, it's so good. So I really came around on it. I agree with you, though. The exchange between Lois and Clark left a lot to be desired. The thing that bothers me the most, though, is like these two have seen a lot over the course of the TV show. And according to Mark Guggenheim, the season 11 comics are in continuity as well. So I mean, he says they are. I don't know, but they're so dismissive of what they've just seen and this threat that they've been warned about. And I get, maybe you could chalk it up to like, hey, there's really nothing he can do about it anyway, but it just felt like they were too cavalier about what they were just warned about.
Like, I love looks like a job for us, and they hold hands and they go off to raise their family. Like, that's A+. But like right before that, it's like, it's in a different reality, a different multiverse where Tom Welling would wear a suit or had and would again. He's like, so Lex Luthor from Mother Earth. She's like, well, you know what you have to do. And then he goes and flies and does something, right? But that was never going to happen. So I have to accept it. But you're right. It's like, I don't know, man, maybe you should look into that.
Yeah. I think if there had just been any kind of concern or something, like anything, it was just like, all right, guys.
Well, it just laughs it off. Yeah.
Now, all that being said, and I know there was no scenario where Welling was going to don the costume, but you and I, we've talked on mic and off mic about our frustrations with the ending of Smallville, the fact that he never physically puts on the costume. And I can't help but imagine a scenario where he did wear the costume, even if it was just for a few seconds, and how that would provide a bit of closure to this aspect of the series finale that has haunted us for all these years.
I feel like, and he said it now a few times, I'm like, if he did this now, he actually might do it. But it's easy for him to say now because he knows he's never going to have to.
Yeah.
So I keep that in mind too. I don't know, because I've talked about this, Craig Byrne, from Krypton site, he talked about it. He's like, well, it would have been kind of cheap for him not to wear it on Smallville and then to wear it on this. I'm like, that's a good point, I guess, but I would have taken it. Like, don't get me wrong. I would 1,000% taken it. Now then he's got, because I remember there's some interview with, I guess, Guggenheim, and he's like, yeah, all the Supermen are going to be together in this episode. I was like, oh, all the Supermen, you say? I guess they just meant the episode and not like in the same scene. Because I wanted Infinite Crisis covers of like 2006 internet of Brandon Routh fighting Tom Welling and who's the better Superman. Like, I wanted that, and we got that with Tyler Hoechlin. We'll get there shortly, but poor Tyler. I'm glad Tyler got Superman Lois, because he got a bad shake in this. He's just like, well, I guess you're a Superman, so here you go, do some stuff. Like, nobody cares about you in this. I want to see Tom Welling. I want to see Brandon Routh. I want to see Kevin Conroy. I want to see these guys. But yeah, it is what it is. And also, he says, I didn't know the president was in town. And people are like, how can Lex still be the president? Look, he was the president, and he's not anymore. And that is dialogue to let you know that Lex was the president on this earth. Let's all move on from it. Let's not try to rip it apart. Like, I have a fanboy explanation for this entire thing, so I can draw diagrams for you people. Like, I understand when people be upset. But what were we going to get? This is the best possible scenario, I think. And I enjoyed it, and I'm happy that this is the button. Nice epilogue to my favorite show.
Yeah, look, ultimately they gave my favorite version of Clark Kent, my favorite version of the Superman ending. So I can't begrudge them that. I have been on the other side of it with the president being in town, that line, because it's just, the thing about it is I'm more okay with him giving up his power. Oh, let me also say too, one thing that I also do recognize, and this went a long way, is that this Clark giving up his powers, it's not just that he wants to be normal. They have children. So there's this whole other component too that wasn't present on the show all those years when he was like, I just want to be normal. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, my feeling was, well, if Lex is still depressed, like how could you let that threat go and give up your powers? But yeah, we don't know the full circumstances and we don't know what's transpired between them. And we could try to fill in a backstory that will make us okay with it.
Well, your fan theory was like, oh, maybe they became friends again. Like,
oh,
okay.
That's right. I forgot about that. That's my theory. You know what? You're right. That's my theory. And I'm going to stick with that. I've forgotten about that. Now, talk about what ifs. If Rosenbaum had appeared, how do you think this would have fit in? I mean, because presumably it would have just been a scene. Like, I don't think it would have been the John Cryer role. Like,
right. Or both of the John Cryer turns into Rosenbaum. Is it like in Justice League Unlimited, there's a two-parter called The Once and Future Thing. It's a real cool time multiverse thing, and time is changing, so characters shift. And then for a couple scenes, John Stewart shifts into Hal Jordan. It's the only Hal Jordan we see in the DCAU. He's like, Hal Jordan, Green Lantern Corps, I'm up to speed. Let's continue. And it's like, oh, okay, that's cute. Could you do something? That would have felt weird though. Like, I like that it's John Cryer. He's jumping around, killing a Superman, and this works. Like, it would have felt out of place. Like, I don't know how you fit in Rosenbaum. I don't know. I would love to see like whatever their initial, brainstorming script was for this.
Whatever. I guess they didn't have one. That was part of the problem. Like, they were like, do you want to come? He's like, well, what am I going to do? We don't know. Yeah, I don't. Well, so there was a comic book. Do you read the comic book tie-in?
I have read Christ on Infinite Earths, Paragon Rising, if that's your question.
That's what I'm talking about. I only just skimmed through, but I know they have the whole Council of Luthers and
he's not in that. It's a very disappointing comic book, frankly. I was not too hot on the comic, honestly. I thought it was going to like fill in and expand, and it was not that at all. But hey, go read it for yourselves, y'all. But I was looking for a guy in a white suit and a black glove in that. No, you see some like Gene Hackman looking guys maybe, but you never see Rosenbaum. So
yeah, I don't know. Or unless like Rosenbaum shows up and he helps Clark fight off John Cryer.
I would have loved that. When I think about, again, actors, availability, like unlimited, when you're not constrained by real life stuff and you can do unlimited story, like, the series finale of Smallville should be Lex and Clark fighting Darkseid together or something. Like that would have made it, that would been fantastic, but you're only good for 24 hours. I'm not shaving my head. So that's we got.
So that's the Clark Kent of Smallville of it all. Mm-hmm. Brandon Routh in the best Superman costume, one of the best.
If it's not first, it's second. I mean, to me, the Christopher Reeve one it's off the page,
yeah, like
perfection. So it's hard to say that's not the first one, but this is number two at worst. It was the Brandon Routh one, like the Kingdom Come, and then they changed the yellow for the last shot, so it's great. But I wouldn't upgrade because I was never a fan of the Superman Returns costume. What about you, Anthony?
No, I agree. I'm not offended by it, but it was never one that really lit my fire. I think I had a lot of the same gripes with it that most people did with the darker colors and the small S and all of that. So no, I thought this was, to connect the Christopher Reeve and Superman Returns iteration with Kingdom Come and to give Brandon Routh the opportunity to get another turn in the cape. Because for as many criticisms have been levied against Superman Returns, I think generally he was well received, and clearly not that this matters ultimately, but clearly this was going to be his big break and he was going to have this huge movie franchise, and it all fell apart on him. And he ended up having a really nice career and had a great turn as Ray Palmer, super endearing and amusing. But I don't know, there's just that personal component of just getting this guy getting the opportunity to step back into the costume in a different version, but to do what he did with it. The moment where he's talking with Lois on the Wave Rider and she asks why he added the black, and he talks about because even in the darkest times, hope cuts through. Hope is the light that lifts us out of darkness. Could be a corny, cheesy line, but it's so earnest and heartfelt, and it resonates. My only complaint about Brandon Routh in Crisis is how little we got of him.
Yeah. And I was all ready for him to be in parts 4 and 5. Then turned to John Cryer. So I'm like, oh no. We got a little hint of Clark Kent, right? He is evolved from before. He's the editor now, much like Earth 2 Superman was the editor in Crisis on Infinite Earths. This Superman is a melting pot of Christopher Reeve. 1 through 4. because he's like, it's not the first time I've gone nuts and fought myself. Check. Superman 3, thank you. You look like my son Jason. Superman Returns, check. Kingdom Come Origin.
Reject
Joker
from
gassing.
Gotham. Yep.
Yeah, we can't say Joker because of WB rules. Bizarre. But gassing the Daily Planet, killing everybody. Kingdom Come, check. And then, of course, he's basically the Earth 2 Superman from Crisis here, which I was hoping he would come back and like sacrifice himself or something. But he got a happy ending, so I'm glad we got that. But no, he's fantastic. And man, he's probably my third favorite Superman. I know that's a smaller sample size, but what he was able to bring to it, like, I mean, his secret identity stuff. See, I know you're not too hot on the Christopher Reeve Clark Kent of it all. So Brandon Routh is that, but like turned back a few notches, which is a little more like, oh my gosh, like all the time. Like he's just a little more of a quieter, quirkier guy than like a complete bumbling person, which fits to not bring attention to yourself. So we got a little bit of that in here, just a little hint of it, but it was great. But man, like they did Tyler Hoechlin no favors because he shows up in this, TV budget costume, and he's like, 3 inches shorter than Brandon Routh, and he's just throwing him around. I'm like, yeah, I'm rooting for Brandon Routh in this situation.
I mean, listen, this is why I was so, mixed on the Superman and Lois TV show. I really didn't have high hopes because of what we had seen so far in the Arrowverse, and I ended up loving the show, and I was so pleasantly surprised. But yeah, they did him dirty in this, and even before that, man, even going back to part 1, after we meet up with Lois and Clark. They're on Argo. They've had their son Jonathan, and then of course Argo is destroyed. They send Jonathan off in the rocket, a la Clark's own origin story. They're seemingly destroyed along with Allura and the rest of Argo, but then of course we find out they were saved at the last second by Harbinger, and they're brought to Earth 38. And there's that moment, that exchange between Clark and Kara, where he's really, he's has lost hope, and she gives him the pep talk. It's like, all right. And then later on, when they're defending the quantum tower and they have to use their heat vision to power it up, and, he taps out before she does. And then even when they land, he's like, oh, you have to show me up as always. And it's just like, I get that it's the Supergirl show. Like, I get it. But I don't like the position that it puts Superman in, because he is in a supporting capacity. Like, I get it. But I don't like that position it relegates him to. And then that's only compounded when we get into the battle with Brandon Routh.
No, I agree. And that's the struggle the Supergirl show had. And I think his first 2 episodes are fantastic when he shows up. But then after that, it's always like, you're stronger than me, Kara. And how do you stay so hopeful? I'm like, but I get it because it's her show. But it's a lose-lose for them, right? Because if they have Superman show up and like do everything she can do but better, it's like, what are you trying to say here? This is her show when he comes in.
Exactly.
Can't do that. But then you're like, you can't have him be like, man, Kara, I wish I was as strong as you. I'm like, But you can, like, man, like light and day difference between the Superman here and then the one we get on Superman Lois. Like it's a fantastic difference. And then he's fighting Brandon Routh, and hey, Zack Snyder is the blueprint, right? Because what a Man of Steel looking fight those 2 guys had, Superman.
Yeah, I know. And the skies above Metropolis and all that. And the other thing too that I really like about this, I that line about this isn't the first time I went crazy and fought myself. It's just tying all of this together. Because even when we talk about Superman Returns, there's all this business about how it was really following Superman 2 and it was ignoring 3 and 4 and whatever. So this ties so much together. And what I like too is that I'm a fan of Kingdom Come, and look, Clark's journey in that story is that the man of action stopped acting and he had to get back in action by the time the story ends. So I appreciate that. But what I do like here is that despite enduring more loss than a mortal man could bear, as the line goes, that he kept going, he kept fighting, and whether in part or in whole, because the fact that he has his son here, which is another component. We don't see Jason, but he is referenced straight out of Superman Returns. But this idea that he suffers the same loss as the Kingdom Come Superman in the comics, but he doesn't just retreat and withdraw from society for a decade or more, that he stays and keeps fighting. So it just tied together so much, and just getting to see him in the costume again and with a different spin on it, man, it was. as much, I was so laser focused on the Tom Welling of it all that, we saw the photos that they released of him in the Kingdom Come costume. I was excited, but I was still just all about the Smallville piece of it. And then the Brandon Routh part ended up being like a true highlight.
Yeah, no, definitely the Superman of it all. And they use the Smallville building for the Daily Planet. So it's a melting pot. Like, I don't see this as the ending for Christopher Reeve or even the Superman Returns even. It's a melting pot of like all those things happen to this particular one, and that's fine. And that's the fun of the multiverse. Like, because if you tell me, like, I'm sure you'd be like, that didn't happen to Christopher Reeve. Like people be upset. I'm like, okay, yeah, it didn't. That's a different variation. He has the same backstory as that character, but we've already established Superman Returns, his own weird thing. So like, this is a perfect. Again, the melting pot of it all. Perfect. We all understand what's going on here, and more than anything else, I'm so happy for Brandon Routh to kind of get that second shot. And I know it meant a lot to him. He's talked about that. And WB really missed the boat, like doing anything else with him after this. You have this perfect Superman costume, you got a guy with the perfect age. He's excited about it. Like, I don't know what it is. You make a project, you find a reason to put this man back in a Superman costume, and they have it, and he could still do it. I mean, he's getting older, but looks great still. And it could totally be Superman for the next few years. So I doubt we'll ever see him again, but it's a missed opportunity that we haven't.
And I was going to ask you that. I was like, it's insane to me. And we've talked about Warner Brothers. And
every decision they make is wrong. Thanks, Lance.
Yeah, and their decision making. So on the one hand, I guess I'm not surprised. It tracks with what we've seen from Warner Brothers. But it's just like, I don't understand how at the executive level you could look at this and the response to it. Because, and they track social media engagement and impressions. Like, I don't know how you look at this and just say, nah, we're good. That was it. I don't know. I don't.
They do that a lot, Anthony, as you know.
I know.
Hope you guys enjoyed that. You're not getting any more.
While we're talking Superman, I have one more, maybe a nitpicky thing, but let me pose this question to you. So with the Tyler Hoechlin Superman, and of course we know when we get to Superman and Lois, they're on their own Earth, so that's separate. But
yeah,
one of the changes that occurs for Lois and Clark in the post-crisis Earth Prime is that where they once had one son, Jonathan, now they have two at the end of this, as Clark seemingly learns.
That is a plot hole.
Yeah, because as we see in the show, the Paragons who were there at the dawn of time, they wake up on the new Earth and they have their memories of what things were like. So they are a bit confused. And then everyone else, they only know this new timeline until Jean goes by and he does his,
Martian Manhunter does his thing,
mind trick, right? And then they put all the pieces together. But, Tyler Hoechlin's Clark was not one of the Paragons at the dawn of time. So like he would have woken up that day with full knowledge of the current, to him,
the boys
timeline. What the hell was that?
That's them trying to let us know. Cause I think on some, they're thinking about Superman and Lois at this point, right? On some level, they're like, oh, we're going to use the crisis and now their show's going to come out of this, right? And instead of having one baby who becomes two babies, maybe here, they have two teenagers, which is fine. It totally changes the Lois and Clark timeline, which I'm cool with. Like that, like they met, they got married, they had some kids, and it just, it was all very fast, right? Back then, but good for them and their backstory. That was a huge oversight. Like there could have been a better way to communicate that. But again, setups, like they're trying to set up this potential new show. And I think that's why I did that way. But even when I was watching the first time, I was like, what? He would know that. He would not be confused.
One more Superman question. You referenced when we see Brandon Routh at the very end, when we get the Oliver Queen narration now about the birth of the new multiverse. Because we come out of Crisis, we think everything's just on this one Earth. But no, like the multiverse was reborn and we see all these glimpses into...
It's kind of a cop-out, right, Anthony?
I mean, a little bit. That's a deviation from the comic. But of course, we would eventually get the multiverse restored, but it wasn't at that point. But, we see the Stargirl show on Earth 2, and we see some Green Lantern imagery on Earth 19, I think, and all
Earth 11 from 2011. I think that's...
Oh, is that it?
I don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it was.
Gotcha. Yeah. And we see the Brandon Routh Superman doing the classic, flying, above the Earth. And once again, we get the notes of music and we get the yellow in the crest. Now, is your interpretation that in this revised timeline on his new Earth, that events didn't unfold the same way and he didn't suffer that catastrophic loss, or they still did, but he's now just fully come through the other side and he's back to his classic costume.
I have not considered that. I will take either answer. Either is acceptable. I don't know. He's clearly in a better place, right? Because the Black S is something even from the comic books. Not even beyond Kingdom Come. It was from the Jeff Loeb run, right?
Yeah, Our World's at War. He adopts that in mourning after all of the losses during that storyline. So yeah, there's other precedent for that as well.
Right. So it could be that situation. I hadn't really thought about it that way. But I'm glad we saw him. I wish that's the one thing I wish we could have added one more thing from Smallville. Like, could we get Tom and Erica like sitting out on a fence and maybe a couple of girls running around, like just to know that my favorite show didn't get erased from existence?
He's like handing Michael Rosenbaum a beer. I'm like, this is great.
He has hair.
Yeah.
That's the cop out of them. Like, and then there was another multiverse. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, the reason they did that is so you would know that all your favorite shows and movies didn't get erased from existence, which I get it. But the whole point of Crisis was to have everything on one Earth. Here's a bold move. Reset the universe, and now Brandon Routh is your Superman. I'm 1,000% on board with that. Sorry, Tyler. But
I know.
I don't know. That would have been something, because that's the emotional hook of the end of part 5. Or listen, I'm conflating the comics and the show now, but like the end where he shows up and he's like, "Oh, I'm the only one here from my Earth. Where's my wife? Where's my family? Oh my God!" Like, and I remember reading it for the first time, like, "Oh my God, this is awful." Like like I was really like shook when I read this in high school. I was like, "Oh my God, what's gonna happen?" And then turns out he's got his own little paradise, thank goodness. But
so it seems.
Oh yes,
until Infinite Crisis, it was a prison. It's like, oh my God. That's why, side note, the end of Arrow with Oliver and Felicity and their little paradise, I watched that. I'm like, this is a horror story. I've seen this. It's not as good as it seems.
In 20 years from now, we'll get the follow up to that. Here, so a little more Superman talk, if I may. The beginning, right, when they erase Argo City, I wasn't up to speed on Supergirl. I remember like he proposed to Lois, and I guess they live there now to have a kid and all that stuff. Sure, right. Here's a ballsy move, because in Crisis, you see Alexander Luthor, or Earth 3 hero Lex fight the crime syndicate hero guy, and that Lois Lane have the kid and send him off, and they're that's that. Like they're switching out elements and names and things. Just actually have them die, and they're like, "Oh, right, that would have been some stakes. We just erased Superman Lois," and then it's okay though, because that's Earth 38. So there's plenty of other Supermen out there, right? And of course it all gets reset again at the end. So it's like it's been fine. But that's a huge missed opportunity with like their son. I remember back in the day, people were like, "Wouldn't it be cool if they somehow like used some stock footage and that was the baby that showed up at the end of Lois and Clark?" I'm like, that's brilliant. I don't know where I read that.
Oh my God.
Right?
I know, because I've talked about this, and I think I said this to you on one of our episodes, but like as far as missed opportunities with these cameos, that's the one thing I keep going back to Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, because it's like that show canceled on a cliffhanger. So it's like if you had just something to put a little button on that, as nice as it was to see Tom Welling, it's like that show wrapped. That they had their opportunity to conclude everything. So it's like it didn't need anything else. I'm glad we love it. We're glad we got it. But the Lois and Clark of it all, it's like, man, like there was some unfinished business there. And I'm sure any number of reasons why that didn't happen.
There were, I'm sure there were factors at play. I will just say I would have still put them in a minor role, right? Just for a couple of minutes, something. It's the legacy of the show and the character are more important than any of that other stuff in this context, in my opinion. I know people might disagree, but I would have still put Dean and Terry in there, maybe with the baby, with the son. I don't know. But that's where I read that on the internet. I thought it was brilliant, that idea. But then to have him show up in some weird alternate future with Oliver Queen, which did not match. I don't know if you saw that episode of Legends, by the way.
Yes, I did.
That's a great episode of Legends, Star City 2046. And shout out to Always on DC's Legends of Tomorrow. I remember that title. So Matt and Trisha out there covering the show. that was an awesome episode. And it's like old man Oliver Queen. It's kind of like Batman Beyond, but it's also like Dark Knight Returns Oliver Queen because he's got one arm. Anyway, super old man makeup. I guess they didn't have the time or the budget for that this time because it's like, Steven, why don't you just don't go to sleep at all and then we'll just film you. That's how he looks. And I felt really bad for that Oliver Queen because apparently he had no team. He thought Sarah died on the Queen's Gambit. He's got nobody. Like, and he just stumbles into having this baby. Like, I don't, wedging in Oliver Queen somehow to everything like that. That's why that exists. And I feel like he could, and I guess on this roundabout way, I'm trying to say like they could have done more with that Lois and Clark baby they send off into who knows where. Because then it's funny. He's around, he's crying, and Mick has to talk to him and drink beer. And but that there was something like obviously that becomes Alexander Luthor of the Crisis, who is this infinitely important character. No pun intended, Infinite Crisis. But I don't know. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh no, totally. The Star City 2046 detour felt half-assed to me. It's like I agree with you. I think it was certainly was done for that purpose of working in Oliver and having or a different version of Oliver and having that moment with him and Sarah. But it was way too convenient that Oliver ended up with this kid and they found him so quick. I don't know. And it's just like there was so much going on in that episode. It just felt like that was a weird little detour. That real estate could have maybe been utilized a little bit more effectively. I don't know that scene achieved what they wanted it to.
Yeah. And I felt like, they're doing it so Sarah has a goodbye with Oliver. Okay. But then they have another goodbye in the 4th episode. So I'm like, you didn't need that at all. That seemed odd. And, you know who I do like a lot actually is Brainiac 5. Me
too.
He's kind of weird, but I like that, like, hey, this is an alien character. He would be weird because I'm sick of all these sci-fi shows where it's like everybody has to talk like we do today, or you can't relate to him. Like, no. Like, there's a reason why Spock on Star Trek is so memorable because he's different. He's on a different wavelength. And so this Brainiac, and I haven't seen a lot of later Supergirl, so I haven't seen a lot of him. But what I have seen of him, I enjoy because he's got like a different energy to him. And I liked his limited appearances here.
Me too. I would also like, just as far as like I said, the rhythm of these 5 episodes is that there's so much cross-pollination among the casts on all of the shows to the point where the only way you really know what show you're watching, especially, watching on that disc that we did where it's just like hour 1, hour 2, is when you read, you see the opening credits and you see who we're starting with. But what I did like was it wasn't so heavy-handed, but each episode there was something that was shining the spotlight on that show's protagonist or cast of characters. I mean, certainly the Supergirl episode that started it, and we start on Earth 38 and all of that, and Lena having to, work with Alex when they're really on the outs. But then in part 2 with Batwoman, the fact that that's when we meet the Kevin Conroy Bruce Wayne, heavy Bat focus. And then part 3, The Flash with the John Wesley Shipp sacrifice, and part 4, Arrow, even though it didn't work for us, the fact that we're in the Speed Force reliving Oliver's memories. It's like there was this attempt, and it was
part 5 of Legends of Bebo.
Yeah. So I thought they did a nice job.
Are all the crossovers like this?
For sure. So yeah, should we talk about Kevin Conroy?
Let's talk about Kevin Conroy. This, man, I don't know. Like, is this my favorite part? I don't know. I think the John Wesley Shipp and the Flash overall is, but Kevin Conroy, the definitive Batman, he's been the voice of Batman for 25 years, and he's finally going to get to play at least Bruce Wayne in live action, right? And the way they introduce him is so brilliant because you go into Wayne Manor and Luke Fox is there, whatever, right? Because he's a Batwoman character, so he's the guy there with Bruce Wayne. Fine, great. And then you hear this voice like, "Don't be so rude, Luke." And he's oh my God, like the reveal of the voice first, and then him coming down the stairs, like that is cinema. That is amazing. And just to hear his voice and to see him delivering because Kevin Conroy, he didn't sound like that. He put on a little bit of a voice, and to see that was like, as someone who watched Batman animated series since I was a little kid, like that was amazing. Like, and he has a decent role in the episode. Like, we talk so much about Tom Welling. We love it. It's great, but it's like a scene and a half and it's inconsequential, really. This is Kate Kane meeting Bruce Wayne, for the first time since she's been Batwoman. And like, it shows you Batman going too far. It's a cautionary tale. Yes, would I have preferred in a perfect world to see Old Man Bruce and Terry McGinnis? Yes, and I still hold out for that one day in live action. Again, what are you doing, WB, by not giving us that? But but to me, like and yes, I know he becomes like evil Batman who killed Superman, but honestly, I was like, that's pretty badass. Actually, I enjoyed that he killed Superman. This version of Batman would do that. Who do you think put him in that armor? Huh? Ooh.
Yeah, no, that's the thing with the armor, the exoskeleton that he's in, and the reveal that he killed him, and even referencing a direct line from Dark Knight Returns, which was also used in Batman v Superman, about the lesson his parents taught him about, the world only makes sense if you force it to. Again, like you said, this melting pot, sort of taking the Dark Knight Returns and Kingdom Come iterations of the character, but also sprinkling in the Old Man Bruce of Batman Beyond, which again, at the jump, you probably think you're heading into that territory.
Yeah, the Bat of the Future, Earth 99.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of spinning that all together. I mean, even a few years ago, watching this, to finally see this guy get the chance to perform the character in live action was amazing. And rewatching it now after his relatively recent passing, it meant even more, and it really packed a punch. And I love the way it played. I mean, I love Batman. He's probably my second favorite character, but it's, I don't feel as strongly as when we talk about Superman. Did you have, was there any part of you that wished, well, I guess you sound like you are okay with him taking the villainous turn in here. Like, or do you feel like, oh man, I would have preferred if he had been more like the Batman Beyond version?
Well, I wish he was a Paragon for sure. I mean, that would have made so much sense. Like, oh, here's our Bat. We can't have Batman on this show, but here's our loophole. We have Old Man Bruce Wayne, and he's part of, because the Paragon should have been the Justice League, right? I mean, if you really think of it, like, you should have had a Superman, a Batman. Where's the Wonder Woman representation? Unacceptable. Huge mark against this. Linda Carter was a guest star in the show for several years, Supergirl, at least one season. I don't know how long. Because there's a Wonder Woman movie. Guess what? There's a Flash movie. Like, I don't understand.
I know.
So I mean, that's here and there, but that should have been right, the Paragons, and so Kevin Conroy should have been that, but he wasn't. But they had interesting things to do. He's like, you say you start with a code and then you take one life. I'm like, this is engaging with, why does Batman kill? Like, this is such a, as we well know, an ongoing conversation in fandom about these heroes killing, and he's engaging with that. And I love his criticism of Superman, because this is a very frank Miller. He's like, Clark, anyone with a badge or a flag, and that is a legitimate criticism of Superman. He's a naive guy who's going to just listen to authority. And I don't know, like, we have enough other versions of all this to kind of fill in the gaps of what might have happened on this world, and it's depressing too. I mean, it's, hey, listen to me, there's no hope. I'm like, damn, that's his last words.
I know.
But I feel like it wasn't just evil Batman for the sake of it. Like, I feel like they made it, and that informs Kate's story.
Yes.
Too, right? How she's going to proceed moving forward. So there was something here for him, more so than, I mean, obviously more than for Tom Welling. I think Brandon Routh had a decent story thread there, but then he got erased. But I felt like, as short as it was, he was in a few scenes, and he did have a start, middle, and end to his appearance here on the Crisis.
No, absolutely. And like, his perspective was informed by the little bits that were given, and the rest that we can fill in from the other stories we've experienced. And yeah, when he's talking about, like you said, starting with the code, I mean, of course, I think back to, 20 years in Gotham, how many good guys are left? How many stayed that way? It's like, you see the effect of all of those years and the toll that they've taken on him. So, and I watched on the disc, there are a bunch of featurettes, and they have a lot of interviews and behind the scenes stuff. And they had an interview with Kevin Conroy on set, and he talked about how it was one thing to your point, that's not what he sounds like. And it was one thing to maintain the Batman voice in the recording booth doing the animated series for a couple of hours at a time. But filming those scenes for like a 12-hour day, he's like, it really was a lot to, stay in that zone for that amount of time. So, it was cool to just get his insight into that as well.
Yeah. And you see the Burtonmobile in the Batcave under a tarp, and I think you see at least something that looks like an Adam West Batcomputer. So, like, again, these melting pots of the characters, or that's how you have to do this thing, because you can't have one of everything everywhere. They're not going to go. Oh, I was going to say, you're not going to go to Michael Keaton's Earth, but can I just talk about that for a second? Robert Wool, cool to see him, right? Why is the bat symbol the Batwoman symbol? And why is the newspaper Batman captures the Joker? Like, what is this, right? Now, headcanon, that's a Batman Beyond bat signal. And that's the Return of the Joker newspaper. That's the only explanation I could possibly have. Are you telling me the bat signal is you don't have the rights to use that? The Batman 89 bat signal? Like, what is that about? Like, if you're going to, am I nitpicking? I don't know. But if you're going to go get Robert Wool as the character from Batman 89, could you put the right bat signal in the sky? Is it that much to ask?
Yeah, that's a good question. Other than Lois and Clark, Dean Cain and Derry Hatcher, are there any other you feel missed opportunities? Any cameo? I mean Rosenbaum, but like any other cameos where you're like, oh, I would have loved to have seen this, and particularly in the realm of television, like this show represented in some way. We even we didn't mention Lucifer, but we even had Lucifer there too.
Lucifer, yeah. So that was a great cameo. I watched the Tom Welling season of Lucifer, so it worked on me. Like nobody knew that was going to happen. Him talking to Constantine, perfect, like so perfect. And knowing the show that I do, he's like, "Oh, you remind me of my brother," because on the show, right. he's got a brother that looks like Diggle, and then just he's such a sleaze. She's like, he asks Mia, like, "What do you want?" He's like, "I want to save my father." It's like, "Oh, daddy issues." I'm like, this is perfect. Like this is, I don't know, like that was, I don't know, 2 minutes.
Yeah,
but just a delightful cameo. And guess what? They didn't announce that Tom Ellis is going to be in Crisis. And guess what? He showed up and it was fun and we moved on. So that was actually a highlight for me. I don't know. Did you watch the Tom Welling season of Lucifer?
I didn't. I watched a few scenes when he was announced, but I hadn't kept up with the show. And this is my OCD nature where I'm like, I couldn't just jump into season 3, but I watched the pilot. I liked it. It's one of those things I'll probably get to at some point. I would never think I would watch a show called Lucifer, honestly, for me, but I'm like, that's the power of Smallville right there. Got me watching that Tom Welling season. Great cameo. Good. I'm glad you called that out. We mentioned it. Krypton, Yes. I believe they tried to get him in there somehow with the scheduling, and that's the
I don't know how he would have fit Segel, Cameron Cuff, but
I don't know, something to some, I mean, it's like, even if he had been there, it probably wouldn't have been what I wanted, because I would have wanted like an exposition dump of how the series was was supposed to end up. So
I had a wife and so you're like, oh, that's who it was, right? He should have been a Paragon. Segel should have been one of the Paragons, man, across time and space.
Yeah, yes.
So that, to me, that's you just finishing, like, again, picking up things that never got concluded. That's your opportunity here, right? So to me, that's a huge missed opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, Wonder Woman, what are you doing? Like, she's part of the Trinity here. I know you're not going to get Gal Gadot on a TV show. I understand that, but you have Linda Carter, like who you have her phone number. You also have Dean and Terry's phone numbers, by the way. We're not asking for things that are out of the realm of possibility. There are people who've been on these shows before. I would like to see, I don't know, maybe she can be Hippolyta on Paradise Island or something, and that's Linda Carter. Like, there are ways to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know, but to me, those are the big missed opportunities to me. What about you? Anything we haven't mentioned yet?
No, I mean, I feel like those were the ones. I think, the Lois and Clark and the Krypton. Yeah, I don't disagree about Wonder Woman. That is that's a glaring omission. I mean, look, we were very used to on Smallville the Batman and Superman omissions, but Batman and Wonder Woman. But here, obviously, we were into Bat territory. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of odd, but I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there was anything else specifically that was on my wish list.
Green Lantern, like a real Green Lantern. I mean, Diggle becomes Green Lantern at the series finale, and then they undo it, which is extremely frustrating because that was a huge plus for me in the Arrow series finale. But I get they wouldn't want to do that here,
right?
Although is that not the perfect time to do it? To see a cutaway of John Diggle flying around on Earth, 17. And he's Green Lantern and he gets erased. Like, can we do that? Like, it's frustrating as DC fans because we know there's all these weird rules with WB and they're always changing. Marvel, you never had this conversation. It's like, oh yeah, well, Spider-Man, come fight with Captain America.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, so my son is a huge fan of Spidey and His Amazing Friends on Disney Plus, and it's a great show for all ages. I enjoy it as well. And of course, now Marvel has the Fantastic Four and everything, and Thing is there as one of the characters. I don't think they've done the full Fantastic Four yet, but the Thing is there, and it's just like, yeah, great. But I know it's true. It's like, as DC fans, we always have to have to ponder these things. But look, as much as we can talk about things we wish they had done that they didn't, they fit a lot in. I can only imagine, just from a logistical standpoint, what a headache this was to put together. It's just in terms of all of the scheduling with the regulars and then factoring in all of the guest cast. So
yeah, it's an achievement.
It really is. Not to end on a down note, but it's just like, I was thinking about this because we both talked about how we fell off with the Arrowverse, and I maybe there are some fans out there who disagree, but I think it's fair to say that this universe, the shared television universe, did not go out with a bang, but rather went out with a whimper. And
hey, Anthony, that reminds me of another DC universe that recently ended.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I know. Like that's the thing, and watching Crisis, and especially rewatching it, in the end, it ultimately was this sort of conclusion, at least to these big events, and then the show's kind of sputtered out. But as you're watching it, and especially when you get to the end with this proto Justice League getting together in the Hall of Justice and sitting down at the table, it felt like a new beginning. So it felt like an end in the sense that Oliver's story was coming to an end, that the one that started all of this. So we do have an ending point, and we now have, but we have this new Earth. We have this team that now has a meeting place. And so it did feel like this was setting up more to come that just didn't come to fruition. And I feel like, I don't know, this might just be a case of a lot of forces converging against the Arrowverse, because you have COVID, which was right after this wrapped up in early 2020. The end of Arrow, which maybe dealt more of a blow to the Arrowverse than they thought it would. Yeah. Just fatigue, right? The fact that, like we said, these shows have been going for so long and for so many episodes. And look, Flash and Supergirl and even Legends, I mean, at the point of this Arrowverse crossover, we're getting a little long in the tooth. It wasn't like they were just getting off the ground. They've been going for quite some time. And the other thing I think about too, and I think about this on the Marvel side as well with Endgame, because you hear a lot of talk about superhero fatigue, and especially on the MCU side and other factors that play there. But the idea I keep coming back to is, for me at least, I look at Endgame and it was just this this massive culmination of years worth of storytelling. And there is a part of me that maybe was just so satisfied with it where I'm like, okay, like I'm kind of good. I'm not as invested or plugged in as what's to come. And so I wonder if maybe there's a little bit of that too. Like, this was such a huge event that they've been building to, and maybe that just sort of satiated the need of the audience. But I don't know. What do you attribute the sputtering out of the Arrowverse to ultimately?
I mean, those are all valid explanations. I think it's a combination of all of it. I think it's a good jumping off point. You're like, okay, good. We're set. I mean, this is like, you're talking about Marvel. It's like the end of phase 1, right? Of the Arrowverse, whatever that was going to be. And now phase 2, like, a lot of real world things got in the way as well. Because there was going to be a Superman and Lois Batwoman crossover, and that never happened. What kind of weird alternate timeline does that exist in? John Diggle was like, which version of that guy is on Superman and Lois? Nobody thought about that. I love, like, and I enjoy pointing them out. They're fun to me. Like, I don't say like, you made a mistake, show. I'm like, it's fun to see like them not knowing what they were doing and trying something else. I think that's what it was. Like, you're like, this felt like, okay, like, what else can you do? Where do you go from there? And I guess you have the Justice League with their chairs, and Black Lightning's like, so how often does the Earth almost end? Like, Black Lightning, like, come on, like, a highlight of this, underused.
So good. That scene with him and Barry on the Wave Rider, beautiful.
Yes.
That little nod between him and Diggle.
Dude, I was going to bring it up. That's like, shout out to our friend Lance Laster. Like, that's his favorite moment of Crisis, when he gives Diggle a nod. Like, all right, this place is all right.
Yeah, so good. So good. I mean, I can't imagine. You think that was scripted? I feel like they just did that. That's the kind of guy. He's just a charismatic, strong character, and that's the kind of guys you're going to bring into the fold. And that's why I was more excited about this Justice League, to see, oh, cool, I want to see Black Lightning and the Flash interact and what's going to happen there. And yeah, he did come back for that Armageddon crossover a couple years later, but the Ryan Choi just disappears and nobody cares. Mia does come back, obviously, in the Arrow series finale, but she's this huge part of the first 4 parts, and she's not even in part 5. I understand why, because she's from the future, but there was the promise for more, but like, what does that more look like? I say all of us, excuse me, but like a lot of us
we're only watching the crossovers at that point. So like, I come back for this stuff, but I'm not going to watch the Flash every week and see what happens. Now, speaking of things that got restored though, like Vibe is back, right? Carlos Valdez. Because I did watch the last season of the Flash, all the episodes, sorely missed the lack of Cisco. He's just the Cisco shaped hole that they could never fill in with all these extra characters they try and plug in. Him criticizing the name Anti-Monitor. I'm like, oh, I love you, Cisco.
Yes.
Like, so is that, can we workshop that a bit? Is that?
I got to give a shout out to Tom Cavanaugh, because the ability to sell some of these lines with a straight face, like, once I was Nash, but now I am Pariah. It's like, all right.
You know, he does really look like Pariah in the comics. Like, that's actually very good. Like, well, I guess, Tom, you look like we got to use you. So I guess you're going to be Pariah. Now we're just talking over the place.
But no, but that too is just as far as, buttoning this up. And again, what it drew from the comics, what it maintained, that idea of Pariah being responsible or feeling responsible for unleashing the Anti-Monitor, different context here with that cosmic doorway or tunnel underground, but still that same sort of idea of this guilt, and then bearing the burden of having to watch all of this. Yeah. So I think it really preserved the core aspects of the comic within this context. I know you had mentioned wanting to rank the episodes. I think we could probably knock that out quickly. What do you think? Do you want to go for it?
Let's do it. Yeah. It's surprising to me, even maybe it's my fandom of the 1990 Flash that puts over the top, but I would rank episode 3 first, then 2, then 1, then 5, then 4.
Mine are exactly the same.
Like,
yeah. No, I
see, 2 and 3 I've gone back on because of Tom Welling, because of Brandon Routh, because of Kevin Conroy, but that's really the only reason. But 3 I think is the strongest overall.
I can't discount the emotional reaction I had watching the Flash's sacrifice, and the fact that it takes not that fidelity to the source material is that crucial to me, even though I know I've mentioned it a bunch of times, but the fact that it took that core moment, I mean, that's such an iconic moment from the comics, and I feel like elevated it and really, elicited an emotional reaction. So yeah, I'm with you on that. That's exactly how I would rank them as well.
Hey, this is a random question as we wrap up. It has nothing to do with really anything, but David Herwood, is he your favorite Martian Manhunter? Because I think he might be mine, with all due respect to Phil Morris.
Oh yeah, I would have to go with him. I mean, he had so much more time in the character with the character.
But he's such intensity. Like that scene with Natch, like, you almost damned us all. But damn, this guy's got some energy to him. And I heard him on Rosenbaum's Inside You podcast a few years ago, and he was like, they were always trying to put like some necklace on me or some curse to like power me down. He's a fun interview. He had a lot of great stories, by the way, too. So I recommend you guys seek that out. And the only thing, like, he wasn't like the John Jones. I liked that Smallville at least did the Detective John Jones thing and all that, but we saw him for 2 seconds in Absolute Justice as the full Martian Manhunter. We got to see David Herwood a lot more. So just seeing him in this, and he got the new costume at the end and that sort of thing. So because people ask me, people ask me, like, I'm like, people need to know or want to know, but like, you talk with your friends about who's your favorite version of this or that. And I think I always used to say Phil Morris by default, but I'm like, I think I got to go with Supergirl's Martian Manhunter.
Not Harry Lennox.
We don't have time for that right now.
Yeah, no, I have to go with the Supergirl iteration of the character. Probably my favorite. I do have definitely a soft spot for the Phil Morris version. So, but yeah,
I know it's a random question to end on, but it just.
I feel like as we just passed the 2-hour mark, but I feel like we've done this crossover justice. Was there anything we didn't talk about with respect to Arrow versus Crisis that you wanted to?
No, I think we really covered it.
I have one last thing, and it's not much to say other than shout out to the music, because the score for this, and actually I talked about this when we did our original Red Skies event, when I was reading the original Crisis and struggling a little bit to get through all those issues, and I was playing the score from this television event, and it was awesome and epic, and right, it was like a live orchestra. Like, they scored this differently than they did the regular episodes. Am I correct? I believe so.
I've listened to that many times on Spotify myself, so I don't know the behind the scenes story of it all, but it does sound like a little more powerful. And they got they use I'm all about the John Williams music, so they use that for Superman. They got some Danny Elfman Batman in there, right? So And of course the Danny Elfman, Shirley Walker Flash stuff, fantastic. I mean, that brings that emotion home for that. And then the themes of the shows, right? They incorporate, the Arrow theme, the Supergirl theme, and all those shows at the appropriate moments. Like that means a lot. It's not just like generic action music. Like they did a good job weaving in all these themes at the appropriate time. So no, good shout out on the score there.
Oh, I promise this really is the last thing, but just because we didn't talk about this, but this got a fair amount of play in the episodes, especially the earlier ones, but the interplay between Kara and Kate Kane. And of course they are the ones who team up and they go to the Kevin Conroy Batman. But what I really liked was Kate leaves Gotham with the piece of kryptonite that Bruce had.
Yes.
And there's this moment where Kara wants to use the Book of Destiny to try to bring back her Earth, and Kate stops her. And there's this bit with
she's like, "You can't stop me." She's like, "I'll try." I'm like, I really was buying into that energy between the two of them, right?
Exactly. And then, not too long, I think the next scene that they have together,
like 2 scenes later,
Kate shows her the kryptonite and Kara tells her to keep it. And I love that because that's straight out of the comics, and this whole idea of Clark entrusting Bruce with the kryptonite ring in case I'm ever controlled, you need to stop me. I trust you that much with it. So yeah, I like that. I mean, even though, again, they had to use Tyler Hoechlin's Clark to further Kara's story and Kevin Conroy's Batman to further Kate's story.
But these are their characters.
These are their main characters, and that's their shows. And so
they were setting up them as the world's finest. I totally get it. I totally get it. Like I like you. I'm like, how do I feel about this? No, I understand. And those actresses had great chemistry. They did. Ruby Rose and Melissa Benoist. So,
that was another thing when I was rattling off all the reasons why the Arrowverse fell apart. But another one, Ruby Rose leaving,
huge loss. Yeah. So
that's another factor in all of this. But it's one of those things I still can't believe this happened. I can't believe they adapted the story that they had 5 shows they could cross. It's like, it's amazing. It's really amazing. And for anyone listening to this, if you haven't watched it, or probably more likely if you haven't rewatched it in a while, if you haven't rewatched it in one shot, it's worth a watch. It's a lot of fun, factoring and especially knowing the flow of this, and where maybe some of the weaker spots are going to be. It's definitely worth a watch. And you mentioned this before, but the relevant seasons of each of the shows on their Blu-rays, they had a bonus disc with all 5 parts on one disc and with the special features. And I bought season 8 of Arrow just to get, it was like $18, and I was like, well, let me just get this. And I was, as opposed to, cobbling together episodes from different streaming services and whatnot, I was like, I just want this all in one place.
That's how I watched it for this on the disc, because the last time I watched it, I was skipping all around, and I do not envy anyone who experiences the Arrowverse in the future and didn't watch it kind of the way we did, because they're going to be totally lost. And I recommend people just go seek out online what order to watch this stuff in, because there's no easy way other than if you have the discs. So
that is a great point. So, of course, people hear the plug for Always Hold On to Smallville and your family of shows. But is there anything in particular you want to mention to folks?
No, we're going through season 9, where we're in the stretch run here. And as I understand it, Anthony, our episode on conspiracy is going to be coming out around the same time as this episode. So a nice unintentional, speaking of crossovers, a nice unintentional crossover between Digging for Kryptonite and Always On to Smallville. So yeah, just find us on social media at Always Smallville with 1 S. And we are going to be wrapping up our episode by episode coverage of Smallville this calendar year. So it's exciting times.
Very bittersweet, but I hope everyone will check out all of your shows. And I was honored to come on to talk about conspiracy. So folks, if you haven't heard enough of the two of us, make sure you tune in.
Well, I should shout out, I have 2 other shows on my quote unquote network, on the Smallville network. Always on the Arrow, hosted by Lance Laster and Monte Chillis, and Always on to DC's Legends of Tomorrow, hosted by Matt Truex and Trisha Ennis. And they are covering, since we're talking about the crossover of those 2 shows, they're covering those shows. So, they're going to get here at some point, and some of them have and some of them haven't, when it comes to crisis stuff. So if you love the Arrowverse, go check out those shows.
Right on. I echo all of that. So thank you, Zach. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for another all new episode. And until then, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.